And for now, we start with our regular program. First, we will have a talk with the amazing Marcus Gilroy-Ware about mis and disinformation. Then we will have a panel discussion together with our Indian colleagues, moderated by my colleague, who was our editor-in-chief this year, Jana Sefer. And then there's a lunch break. And after lunch break, we will directly continue with an amazing program. So I'm looking forward to welcoming Marcus on stage. Give him a warm applause. Yeah, please. Ah, you lost your mic. May I help you?
Oh, it's just gone down here.
Yeah. That would be too bad. Perfect. So the basic idea was that the fantastic Alexandra Wolf would be moderating today, who is the festival director and director of Republica. Unfortunately, you know, we have autumn. It's pretty cold for ages in Berlin, and she is not well today. So I'm stepping in there. So I hope you and the audience takes it with a bit of humor if I take a bit more longer than Alexandra would do. I know she's deeply into the topic. And she was kind enough to send me her questions. So it will be a bit of a cheat from my side.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here. And of course, we also wish Alex well and hope she feels better soon.
So should we directly dive into it?
Say again?
Should we directly dive into the conversation? So you wrote a book, After the Fact, The Truth About Fake News. In your book, you problematize the term fake news. Why is that? What is the danger of using chiffres like fake news or fake facts? What is news and what are facts then?
Well, so this book actually is in some ways a sequel to my previous book, where I was taking issue with some of the ways that social media are talked about and thought about, and some of the terrible impacts that they can have. And I was finishing that book just at the moment where Donald Trump was elected in the US in the autumn of 2016. And I realized at that time that there was also a lot of misinformation about misinformation. And in particular, I noticed that one of the tendencies we have is to be incredibly reductive in our diagnosis, often because things are urgent, we're traumatized, we're not quite sure what to make yet of a traumatic situation like that. And sometimes that can lead to a sort of reductive response. And so the phrase fake news is actually really interesting because it has at least three kind of distinct and I would say interlocking meanings, right? So part of that response to the traumatic moment of Trump being elected was for us to say, there's this thing called fake news, which is when a bunch of teenagers in Macedonia or, this kind of certain elements within the US as well are publishing news stories online that are patently untrue. Things like, the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump, right? And as a result, this has helped Donald Trump into the White House. And it's a terrible thing. And particularly within kind of, I would say, sort of centrist, liberal American frameworks, there can often be a tendency to look to technology and to make these kind of very simple and I would say a little bit hysterical diagnoses of political situations. And so I felt that was happening there. And so through that simple diagnosis, they made this kind of sense of Donald Trump has been elected because of this kind of fake news. Well, who jumped onto that kind of diagnosis? Donald Trump himself and his people and that kind of American reactionary element, right? And they looked at that and said, fake news, this could be a useful tool for us. Now we can discredit real journalism, reliable journalism. Not that there's a strict distinction, of course, between real journalism and fake journalism, but even the most reliable investigative journalism could be discredited with the phrase fake news. And then the third meaning is that, of course, at the same time, journalism had been facing its own crisis for at least 10 years at that point. Funding models collapsing, newspapers declining circulation, increasing pressures on journalists, smaller numbers of people assisting in the newsroom. So it's, you know, unsurprising in some ways that the quality there was also declining, more typos, more inaccuracies, these kinds of things. So there's sort of, you know, that made it then easy to point at that journalism and say, oh, well, look, they are unreliable. That is fake. This real journalism is fake. So there's, you know, it's actually a much more complicated situation than just saying, oh, fake news. And I wanted to kind of take issue with this misinformation about misinformation that we have and sort of understand the problem with a bit more nuance.
So if you would have a, I don't like the word better, but a different word, a more accurate word for the problem, because as you said at the beginning, the problem is out there. What would be the more accurate description of the problem we are facing with?
Well, I mean, one of the things I've both been congratulated for and criticized for in my analysis is kind of having such a broad definition of misinformation, really, and sort of when it's that all-encompassing, then obviously there's going to be no one word that can really talk about all of it. So, you know, I mean, I think there are sort of questions of ideology and self-reproducing belief systems that actually have the effect of obscuring and hiding problems that we want to see. And there's obviously aspects of denialism. I talk a lot in the book, there's a question on conspiracy theories, so I talk about like hyper-suspicion and the sort of over-firing of suspicion. I talk about kind of that sort of stodgy, centrist, liberal position where you carry on insisting that everything is fine in the world, even when faced with crisis, and you want to go back to normal as quickly as possible. Talk about, you know, lots of problems in the newsroom, this kind of false beliefs about what objectivity really is or impartiality. I mean, to me, all of these are different forms of sort of misinformation of some kind, because all of them have the effect of obscuring what we can see. So rather than having one or two words, in the end, we have sort of a dozen closely intertwined different social phenomena that contribute to misinformation.
So if we look at the whole situation, and in particular also the defamation of journalists, and in particular investigative journalists, what went wrong? What made people don't believe or be suspicious of the sender's integrity? And how is it in the context of like real mis and disinformation? How the relationship between both?
Yeah, I mean, these are really big questions. I'm trying as hard as I can to give short answers, but not really succeeding. So the question, well, why are people suspicious of journalism? Let's start with that part. I mean, I think it isn't only journalism that has this problem. I think, I mean, at least in the UK and the US, and probably you've seen this here in Germany as well, there's also been a lot of suspicion of scientists, particularly in the context of the pandemic. There's been suspicion of judges in various countries. At the moment, in Brazil, Bolsonaro is doing a massive campaign against the judiciary. This is a global issue. In all these cases, what you can say is that in the last few decades, there's been a sort of like, I guess, we have to look at power, really. We have to say, well, who's been proximate to power, right? Who's been sort of telling the stories in a way that's disruptive of that power, and who's been kind of relaying information either in a way that pretends to be completely objective or in a way that sort of subtly validates those existing power structures. And I think that even when, you know, a lot of very honest journalists were very well intentioned, a bit like other sort of types of work that are involved in relaying information, sometimes they have the kind of effect, or perceived to have the effect, of kind of validating those power structures. And I think that we're at a moment, really in the last 4 or 5 years, where there's kind of this sense, which I hope we'll have a chance to talk about, where those kinds of existing power structures haven't really served us very well, right? Particularly after the Cold War, we dived into this idea of like a capitalist democracy, which is sort of an oxymoron, but we did it anyway. And now there's a sort of rupture appearing there. And a lot of people aren't given the kind of tools that they need to make sense of those contradictions. And so then they turn on the sources of information that have been associated with those kinds of power structures.
I think we have also seen that in particular within times of Corona, also in Germany, I mean, there was so many people out there not believing in science that it was shocking, and also like finding new conspiracies.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I started writing about conspiracies believing that there was this sort of sense of like distrusting science because it's science, and they don't, you know. And when I looked at it closer, I realized that actually a lot of, for instance, like COVID deniers or vaccine deniers or whatever, it's not as simple as to say that they distrust science. It's that they have a very particular distrust of how they perceive power, and they have a kind of low level of political literacy in being able to distinguish which bits of that kind of apparatus to distrust and which bits to trust. So actually that means that when there's science that validates their kind of, let's just say, alternative viewpoints, but, you know, really crazy beliefs, then they love science. So it's a kind of strangely selective thing which told me that it was more about their relationship to power than really about specific domains such as science or journalism. Again, they love journalism when it validates what their suspicions are.
How much, and now I'm going a bit off script.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Probably that's a good thing, isn't it?
So what I've seen in the past is that there are many social media bubbles out there, and creating kind of their own narrative, their own truths, their own sharing, their own, for example, with Corona. And I know an example where you try to talk to a person and he or she presents you with many alternative news sites, facts, to stay with the expression by Trump. And it seems like they are so much in their bubble that you don't even know how to reach them. How do we have a chance to, like, go through to get through to them, like trying to reach them?
That's a really good question. I think the question of what's to be done in future, what are the solutions, is always the most challenging thing. I mean, with bubbles, we only really see bubbles and sort of, you know, those kinds of things in the context of extremes, which is quite interesting. So yes, those kinds of COVID denial things, you know, there's a German-Australian anthropologist who looks at filter bubbles a lot called Axel Bruns, and his work suggests that actually filter bubbles are mostly really overblown, but the one, looking at German politics, the one place he found something that looked like that was with the AfD. There's lots of like self-reproducing filter bubbles. And I think the same is true with these kinds of like reactionary science denial kinds of things as well. I think, you know, to me, these are a political problem. Even if they arise in the context of a public health crisis or, you know, some other kind of, let's say the environmental crisis, they're really a political problem. And so I think for us to fix them properly, we kind of have to go to the source. You know, we have to look, why are people so alienated to begin with? Why are they so suspicious to begin with? The amusing thing to me about, for instance, the conspiracy beliefs is not that the world doesn't have conspiracies, right? Look at the Volkswagen emissions scandal, look at other things like that. There's plenty, but they're mostly quite boring, bureaucratic conspiracies. The ones that are imagined by these people are totally different. And, you know, there's the suspicion there, and there's the lack of political literacy that kind of caused that misfiring. And I think we probably have to go to the sources of those and try to address that, which is, of course, a much longer and slower and more difficult.
But what would be for you the sources of those? I mean, yes, we see a political tiredness, and you called it analphabetic politic.
A sort of political illiteracy. Well, I think the concept of literacy is really helpful now because, you know, you can talk about like sort of us kind of knowing the facts or whatever, but, you know, people who are really, really literate in a sort of body of work or in the way a particular technology works understand it in motion. They understand how it works, right? And one of the things I feel that this sort of stodgy, great sort of capitalist thing that we've built in the last 40 to 50 years hasn't really prioritized giving us is the sort of understanding of the workings of our own society. So there's a big hole there. There's a big silence. And into that silence, human beings are storytellers. We'll always try to make something to fill in that silence, especially when there's quite a lot of strong emotion. We feel, I think a lot of people feel quite angry about the state of the world, particularly if you look at the future and how uncertain and grim it might appear to be. That strong emotion and that silence together, I think can lead to some quite pathological outcomes. And so we have to sort of transparency initiatives I think are really good. Obviously, just having better political education. This is something that the UK does really badly. I'm embarrassed to even tell you, having been to secondary school in the US and the UK, the kinds of political education we didn't have, you know what I mean? That has to improve.
I'm actually not German, so I can't talk about the German political education, but I'm Austrian, and we learn a lot in the history context in higher education, but not that much about current affairs, how it all comes together. We learn how the voting system works, of course, but not, I think, and I wonder if you agree, I think within education, the broader background, the broader perspective is not often enough taught and told.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I used to get really frustrated with my students for writing, when they wrote essays, they would use this kind of odd words like nowadays, right? Which I think of as being an inappropriate word for an essay anyway. And I was frustrated with that. And then until I realized, A, you should never blame the students, but B, they're writing that because they're struggling, right? They're struggling to talk about a present moment which doesn't have a name. The British journalist George Monbiot wrote about, he said, imagine if the people of the Soviet Union had never heard of communism, right? In our time, this is the relationship we have to the prevailing ideologies of our time. We don't have a clear way of talking about and thinking about that. And these students were sort of, I teach technology and media and communication and that kind of thing. And as we all know, there's been a sort of huge proliferation of those tools and technologies. And these students who are, a good 10, 15 years younger than me, that's been their whole lives. I'm just about old enough to remember when there was a life before smartphones and stuff. They're really not. And so they're trying to think through what they know must have been a huge shift and has given them a life that's totally incomparable to that of their parents, but they don't really have the tools to do that. And I see that as again, it's kind of a failing of the society that's produced them, but it's also it's kind of a systematic denial in giving them that information.
I think we are already on the track for the third part of the questions I have here, which I think fit perfectly in now, is how can we create, or is mainstream journalism and the way we share information and the way we inform the general public, in that sense, with all the new technology, what you just mentioned, that there's a new generation out, not even having the possibility to know how it was before. Is it kind of a thing of the past, and do we have to think about new ways of informing and educating and sharing news, or is there a way to uphold it and save it?
I think, that's a fascinating question, and I'm sure that's really a group problem, right? This is why I love this kind of event, because I think we can hopefully be thinking about that together. My sense is that the lines around different forms of formalized knowledge are being blurred, and I can't really think of many moments in history where once they were blurred, they were put back again intact. So I think in terms of being a journalism educator, I'm now trying to teach my students to think about, well, what next? Where can we go? If the job of a journalist is to write newspapers and make TV packages, then I'm worried. But if the job of a journalist is to make sure the public are well informed about things that are happening, then we could be looking at whatever tools we have at our disposal to carry on doing that. The other thing that I would say, which I think is really, really important, is that, if we look at prior generations, we could say, well, they they more or less did their training imagining that the world would carry on being as awesome as it is, right? And that's fine, whatever. You know, you could say, actually, we've known about climate change for 100 years, so they had no excuse. But basically, they had this kind of sense of, well, you know, objectivity means one thing in that kind of world. Now we don't have that luxury, right? We do everything we do pretty mindful of the fact that we do so in the face of crisis. And I just think that makes all the notions of, like, whether it's journalistic, objectivity or whatever, documentary making, other forms of media making, totally untenable. Because now we have to be responding to something which is a verifiable crisis, or we're not really doing our jobs properly. You know, the BBC in the UK took until 2018 to have, like, when you have a climate scientist, to not also have a climate denier because they felt they had to be balanced. Like, that is absurd. So, but that's kind of everywhere. So in terms of where we go next, we have to be thinking in terms of different forms, like going where the people are, going onto the platforms where there's already a lot of users, trying to be as creative and engaging as we can. But we also have to kind of drop this notion that there isn't a crisis and, you know, everything's an open question. Not everything is an open question now. We have to, our survival rests on addressing those crises.
Oh, well, I want to become a student of yours and sit in your lecture and learn more of it. And as we are at the end of our time, I do have one very short and very quick last question. So in a nutshell, if you would have, like, we have many storytellers out there, and what we have seen is that often enough negative stories work better than positive stories, and like very click-related headlines that kind of emotionalize. Would you say, and that's a very personal question for me, would you say that positive storytelling in news has a chance? Is there a way that good news could also change something in the sense of mis and disinformation and the way people perceive news?
I want to keep the answer really short because I know we're out of time. I think I try not to see things in terms of positive or negative, but in terms of how much attention, because we're in an attention economy, right? So it's really, the winners are the ones who can command a lot of attention. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't sound cynical, but that's just the reality that we're sort of living with. I've seen these kinds of things like Upworthy, where they just try to focus on good news. I've also had, you know, friends and colleagues who are doing research about climate change or whatever, saying how much of a struggle they actually have getting across those kinds of things, which, you know, maybe negative stories get a bit more of a click, but they also, there's a limit to that, actually, beyond which people really don't want to engage if it's too bad. It's hard to kind of, I'm trying to be brief, but I think probably too much of either extreme. It just sounds like such a sort of milquetoast response, like give it in the middle. I don't really mean that. I just mean if you're bashing people over the head with the kind of crisis, I think that's unlikely to be effective. But you know, why go on about good news when we know that things are bad?
And if you sugarcoat everything, it doesn't make sense as well. Thank you so much. I hope you stay for the lunch break so that our lovely audience, if they have questions, can continue the conversation with you. That's the beauty of the conference. And now we hand over to the mayor of Ramallah, who is giving a short intro on storytelling for the common good.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much.
Well, and thanks so much for having me.
Welcome on stage, Musa Hadid. We already had you on stage last night after the fantastic film, The Mayor, which is still available online. And I have to say, I was deeply moved by the responsibility you take as a politician and how you see your role there. So thank you so much for that. Here's the stage for you, and we are looking to your concept for storytelling for the common good.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be among you today at the Human Rights Film Festival, Berlin. It's joyful to return to physical gatherings after almost 2 years of strict social distancing, we have no better cause to come together at this festival to celebrate co-production for human rights and to make voices heard. Everyone comes to this world with a message to fulfill. We realize it in different means: in arts, academia, sports, music, parenthood, or by even becoming a mayor. In the past 10 years as mayor of Ramallah, I have taken on a mission beyond that a city should simply function and run. A mission of a city with no independent state, deprived of its basic living rights, invaded, under rubble and destruction. Nowadays, some might think that a mayor's role is difficult because people's dreams are mounting and have fictional demands on what a city should deliver. Yet in Ramallah, Palestine, as a mayor, my role is strenuous despite the simplicity of people's dreams. For example, I can't fulfill the wish for kids to have a water park, or to visit the sea, to walk safely to school, or to have an airport or a metro, nor to receive the minimum per capita consumption of water, or to build a sufficient cemetery. On top of that, there is the artless dream of liberty, equality, and peace. In arts, we found our way to build a narrative about our reality and resilience, and a way to resist oppression and injustice. In art, we painted a picture of our freedom. We colored the segregation wall with artistic messages to the world. We, on the other side of the wall, have a story to be told, and you only need to see and listen. The mayor's documentary film served a great deal in telling our story, but simply showing you the story as it is. It put facts out the way they are. It depicted happiness and struggle colliding into one scene in one city. You have seen a man whose mission is to make his city a better home to live in the face of multi-pronged challenges, where everyone can plant their hopes and dreams and see them grow and flourish, and where everyone can sense dignity and choose purpose to wake up to every day. Despite the oppression, I was determined for Ramallah to be an upbeat place where visual and performing arts invite everyone to celebrate life and culture and feel like they belong. A place where the youth see through the fences and walls and believe that the sky is their limit, even when the colonial settlements are suffocating every piece of land around them. You were able to see the dark and bright sides of Ramallah. One side that has been bearing the wounds of the occupation for decades, and still does, and another that blossoms with life, calls for unity and democracy, and chants for peace. We are Ramallah, or we Ramallah as we saw it in the film yesterday, is what the citizens and municipality of Ramallah chose to name the city's next chapter. We chose unity, inclusion, and resilience. a chapter in which we write about how we want to change the world into a meaningful and just place that welcomes everyone, where its doors are never closed to anyone, and where the sea, church, and mosque are only 15-minute drive away. As part of human rights, and with the rising pace of technology and digitization, we are witnessing voices being silenced online and over social media channels. Artistic messages are being attacked online as offline. Palestinian content in particular, as well as those who advocate for Palestinian human rights, are subjected to discriminatory censorship policies across major platforms. Many digital arts productions are being censored, deleted, or suspended. As films are a universal language, which transcends meaning and relevance for all people regardless of their backgrounds and spoken language, let us call for art that brings human rights hand in hand with human dignity. Let our civilization become richer and more colorful through exchanges with one another, so we can progress towards peace and development in our world. Eventually, let us, through this festival and in every congregation for human rights, keep remembering and honoring those who sacrificed their lives fighting for their rights, independence, liberty, and existence. I look forward to the upcoming days of the festival and the future ones for more stories that put us further steps closer to a just and human reality. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for this beautiful and important speech. We will keep you on stage for the following panel.
When do you want to?
Best this seat. I think I was told by my lovely colleagues behind the stage. And now I hand over to Jana Sefer, who is going to moderate our first panel, which is going to be our first truly hybrid panel, having panelists from India, live on stage in Berlin, and online. So we will hope it all goes well.
Yeah, welcome also from my side. As Anna said, I'm Jana. I am also a journalist. I'm now this year working for the Human Rights Film Festival as an editor, and I have the pleasure to do this panel. I'm really excited about it, since I think constructive journalism might be a solution to some issues we are facing at the moment in journalism. So I am very pleased to have you here, Major Musa. Please just sit down. And then we also have Jesse joining us from the Netherlands. She is the chief editor and founder of NayTV. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Yes, thank you so much.
Telling platform that is focusing on stories from indigenous people, especially telling stories from their perspective. And then we also have two guests, as we can see online from India joining us. This should be Nanzi, a journalist, if I'm not mistaken, from Khabar Lahariya, the only newspaper run by female journalists in India. And she's also a protagonist from the film Writing with Fire. And then we have Ellen Heinrichs joining us. She's a journalist and head of digital programming at the Deutsche Welle. Welcome online. Can you hear us well? We can't hear you, but I think you can hear us. Is that correct? Okay. I hope we're trying to fix that. So maybe let's start with our guests here in the studio. And I would like to start with you, Jesse. We had a little chat about that earlier, and I think maybe what would be interesting if you could give us a bit of a definition from your perspective what constructive journalism is, what it's supposed to be, and yeah, also why you founded NaTV, what the idea behind it is.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here amongst so many great minds. We founded NaTV as a subsidiary of the Sinji Foundation, who has been working in support of indigenous peoples and organizations for change, for the protection of their rights. And I think what constructive journalism is, or what it should be, it touches a lot on what Marcus was saying, is that there's this blind spot of what capitalism is and how it forms our societies. And mainstream media is very much rooted in capitalism and colonial structures. And to be able to see that more, we have to see the perspectives that are outside that, because storytelling is never objective. It's always rooted in language, in protocol. Even if we do describe facts, the language that we use to describe the facts is always subjective. And that's not a problem as long as we recognize it and honor that. But to create more objectivity, we have to go outside those structures and see the indigenous perspectives on who we are and on our perspective. So that's what we try to do with NaTV, is bring those perspectives into these spaces so that we can see them and see more of, yeah, what brought us here. Yeah, that's in short.
Thank you. Ellen, maybe we could check again if we can hear you now. Oh, we can't even see you anymore.
Very well.
Now I can hear you. Yeah? Very perfect. So I would like to ask you a similar questions. I do know that you are focusing on constructive journalism a lot in your work. And what do you think, how does news look like to fall under the umbrella, basically, of constructive journalism?
Well, I'd say that constructive journalism consists of 3 different pillars, in my view. There's, first of all, what was just said by Jesse. It is about a diversity of perspectives that we really need to include in our reporting, because as she just said, there is no such thing as objectivity. And in order to stay relevant for as many people as possible, we also need to include as many voices as possible in our reporting. That's for one. Second thing is, we know that many people really do avoid the news these days. About 1/3 of the world population does say, I do avoid consuming the news from time to time because it's simply too depressing, and I don't really know what to do about all of these problems. So we need to change our reporting to, keep doing what we need to do, meaning inform the general public, and that needs us to include much more solutions reporting into our journalism. So we need to report as rigorously on solutions as we already do on problems. And third thing is, I think journalism really needs to change a little bit. It does not only have to report on problems and solutions, but it also needs to foster debates, meaning constructive debates where, people are really getting some value out of this kind of journalism by seeing more possibilities, by also engaging in constructive discussions where, as many voices as possible are getting heard. And I think this is something new to journalism, not only, pointing fingers at what's going wrong, but also contributing actively to a public dialogue.
Thank you so much. And I would like to, right, because it fits so good, I think, right here to ask you a follow-up question, because I feel like when I started being a journalist, which is not too long ago, maybe 8 or 9 years, there were a lot of people teaching me in workshops and in internships, how to write a good headline, how people read my story, So it was really focused on basically constructing a story so people will be interested, which is important, I guess. But on the other hand, I don't remember a scene where someone told me, check if this is relevant, maybe do a follow-up question. So I really wonder why are especially maybe big media houses sometimes still, not, or what is the fear? Why don't they are more open even to constructive journalism?
I think many of them still consider constructive journalism to be some sort of ideology. So journalists themselves think they are being very critical, and traditionally they consider themselves to be very objective. And it does take some time to really convince them that in a sea of information, nobody can be objective. There's always, some sort of construction, as you just said, when it comes to reporting. But of course, it leaves the journalist a little bit less powerful because he's not the gatekeeper of information anymore. And I think this change in the minds of journalists is really happening slowly, but as they see that constructive journalism is extremely successful because people tend to consume it longer, they love to share it, you get a lot more women engaging in social discussions on constructive journalism. They see the value for their reporting, for the media houses themselves. It's even possible to make money with constructive journalism. And I think this does really contribute to a slow but steady change in journalism towards the goal of a more constructive journalism.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and Jesse and I had this chat this morning already on objectivity, so we will go back to that later. But now I have a question to Mayor Musa, because I think that was also, Ellen was touching this topic. You are, as we heard already, the protagonist of the film Mayor, and that is a film by David, who joined us yesterday for the screening and the film talk as well. A very powerful film. And he said even yesterday that he followed you around for 20 months and you weren't aware that this will happen. And I think not many filmmakers, and especially journalists, don't have the time to do it. But what was so special about this documentary, and what was maybe David's approach, if you can talk a bit about that, how this story was told, and what was the goal? I mean, you are not the filmmaker. What was the goal of the story?
Thank you. If I may comment on your dialogue just a few minutes ago, that I think that we have to pay more attention also for the social medias today. In the past, we used to hear about journalists by names. That means that we had 10, 15, hundreds, thousands, okay. But nowadays, we have almost trillions of journalists because of the social media. So everyone has his own mobile in his hand, and he's working as a journalist in a destructive way in most of the times. So I think the real journalists must pay more attention how they can not compete, but how can they present themselves in a constructive way, and how they can tell the story, taking into consideration that telling the truth is always the shortest way for everything. So I'll come back to your question. I think David tried to tell the smaller story of Palestine, of Ramallah, in this film. It's a new way of telling the story of Palestine. In the past, and in the medias all over the world, the story of the conflict in our area and the crisis between the Palestinians and the Israelis were always biased. Biased because we know for a fact that the media is controlled by some group of the people, by the Israelis mainly. David tried to give another dimension of the crisis, of the suffering of the Palestinians, in a way that he tried to give the the audiences another scene of how the Palestinians can build, how they can teach their kids, how can they have their own health system, how cities can be run even though we are under occupation, how can a mayor deal with problems that is not usual for other mayors around the world. It's not something easy for a mayor to deal with water crisis under the condition that we are talking that the water is just underneath our land. Israel is taking this water and sell it to the Palestinians, but with limited quantities. So he tried to show something different, that even though a city or a country that is under occupation, still these people are capable of building their own systems. They can deliver services to the citizens on different levels, governmental, local level, and there's always hope. And that was what we saw in the film yesterday, that always there is a hope for a better future. Even though we are under occupation, but still we are looking for the day that we get our freedom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would like now to see if we can speak to our guest from India. Can you hear us? Yeah, is there a bit of nodding? Okay. As I said, you're both journalists in India, and Nancy, you are not only a journalist, but also a protagonist of the film Writing with Fire, which is a very inspiring documentary about a newspaper that is only run by female journalists, and the first one and only one in India, basically. And it really shows powerful that you have to be very bold, you have to be very strong sometimes to get those stories. And I think it really shows also that you use a lot of constructive journalism, since you are reporting on human rights issues a lot. So what gives you the power to do this?
So let me start. My name is Nazni, and I've been working with Khabar Lahariya at the media, at the journal, since 2016. I'll just attach my mic. Okay, I'll carry on. So, Khabar Lahariya has just women who are working, and that includes women who are from lower castes. They're called Dalits and tribal women. Earlier, we used to have women who were not very educated, and a lot of women who lived in villages. And I think the remaining part of the question was, I'm not able to get the audio very clearly.
Okay. Maybe we'll try again at a later stage if it works better.
I report on women's issues, and I am a woman, and I have struggled a lot. So all the women who were working here have actually had some sort of struggle, and then have then joined here. Many of us, when we joined Khabar Lahariya, we didn't know anything about reporting. We didn't know anything about the laws. We didn't know about all kinds of structures. But once we started working here, we acquired knowledge about the legal system. And then when we started to publish the paper, we sold the paper ourselves as well. And then we had a YouTube channel, and we make our own videos. We sell these videos. We generate news content. All of us are from rural areas, and so we actually know the areas that we are reporting about. So there are many issues when we look at our areas, especially related to women's issues. And generally, women's issues are not covered in the media. So sometimes they are powerful women, and maybe they get some space in the media, but it's generally only what the officials say. What is said at the official level is what is actually then represented in the media, and they'll just get about 4 lines of space. So there are many, many issues that come up, and all of us have struggled. For instance, I have really struggled, and we have been working on women's issues. So whenever we come across women who are having problems, we try to report about that. And so we go to various officials, and we try to take up that news and bring the voice of these women to those people. And I think that's how I kept getting inspired. And I think as I've been working, a lot of people have been getting confidence, and it's been very good to get that feeling. And I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe just one more question, if we can do that for Suman, who is your colleague as well as a journalist for a daily newspaper in India. How is, I mean, Nancy started with that, but what are your challenges, and are you actually talking a lot in India in your conferences about constructive journalism and how you tell stories? So to get some insights into journalism in India, maybe.
So when we speak about constructive journalism in India, there is, there's one kind of journalism, which is mainstream journalism. So over there, you don't really have a big role for constructive journalism. We have a faculty, and what we're teaching over there and the newspapers that we have, what we see there is that from the front page to the last page, the priorities are quite different. They try to present creative news. And what we try to do is what the headlines that are created come out of that. Now, as far as constructive journalism is concerned, that really isn't reflected. But we see a lot of creative journalism. So when I take a look at mainstream media, I do feel that there is a very small role for constructive journalism. In fact, quite often there's a lot of criticism in terms of negative journalism. And what we feel is that you need to have actual facts represented. You need to have criticism that is represented. And you also, when we think about the solutions, because quite often what is said, and a lot of the students who come to us, we say to them, and who work in the newspapers, and who work on various issues, and who work in the electronic media. And what is actually said is that if there is no solution, then what's the point? I mean, the question really is what is happening and what should be happening. When we speak of newspapers, we see that there's the editorial page, and that is generally left alone, because what we generally say is that there shouldn't be views in news. We have an editorial. Just for our writers, where they can express themselves, where they can take up various issues and present solutions that they have in mind. But when we speak of human rights, and when we speak of constructive journalism, then what we feel is that when we raise these issues, for instance, we have the Indian Constitution, and the Constitution gives protection to fundamental rights. However, whenever these kind of issues come up, then we tend to look at it from a prism of, well, this event has happened, what has the police done? And we aren't really able to give those rights that kind of protection, despite the Constitution. So I feel that our media actually isn't quite able to stand up, and it is not able to fulfill its role. And it's very important for there to be this kind of constructive journalism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think it was okay with the technique, but a bit struggling. I can really recommend you to watch Writing with Fire, which gives beautiful insights in the journalism in India and the newspaper led by female journalists. I would now start talking about the objectivity, as I mentioned before, but I would also like to remind you, if you do have a question from the audience, so please feel free to raise your hand, maybe now or later, or if there's anything you would like to discuss or share or ask, please feel free to do so. If there's no question yet, we're getting a microphone, so if you have a question, just step forward to the mic. I will have a look at it and get back to that from time to time. But if there is no question yet, I would like to ask you, Jesse, again about this objectivity topic we talked about this morning briefly, and I think that was really interesting and a good reminder. So do you even think it is possible to achieve objectivity in storytelling? And how do we define objectivity, basically?
Well, I think it's good to strive for objectivity, and I think facts should always be respected, but I think you can never find objectivity in one story or in one telling of a story or in one news outlet or in one perspective. That's just not possible. And that's not a bad thing per se if we allow a variety of perspectives to stand next to each other equally. And I think even further back, if you from our perspective, from this westernized perspective, we do not even recognize that the whole system that is rooted in colonization, in capitalism, is a perspective as well. We think that these values of hierarchy, of competition, of individualism, that those are sort of natures of law, and they're not. And you don't see that unless you go outside those systems and you look at indigenous cultures and you look at indigenous perspectives, which are very much rooted in collaboration and in seeing humanity as a part of nature. And you need these perspectives to be able to see what the construct of capitalism and colonialism is and how it has its effect on the world. That's where it starts, I think, and then if you talk to indigenous peoples, which, I mean, there's 6,000 indigenous cultures alive on the world today, so they are as diverse as you can imagine. But there's similarities in how they see humanity, how they see the climate crisis, how they see the role of humans on this planet, not as a plague, but as a part of nature. That is very important for nature to be in balance with. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Ellen, I would also like to go back to you now. As we mentioned, you work on constructive journalism, try to develop that at the Deutsche Welle. So what do you think, is it even because I think you mentioned that readers do like constructive journalism, they spend more time on reading those stories. Could you maybe go a bit more into that? Are there any studies on this, and do you have any research that shows that is actually something people want?
Yes, I do. I've actually published a study myself only a couple of weeks ago. You can see it online at the website of the Constructive Institute in Denmark. And I found out a couple of very interesting things. So for one, that people are really looking for solution-oriented reporting, especially when it comes to, topics that are very relevant these days, crises topics, so to say, Corona or the climate crisis, of course. And then it seems that it is even more important for young people. So storytellers that want to reach young audiences to really have to know that these young people, they don't really need, the warning anymore. They are quite aware of what's going on and they take it dead serious. So what they need is some help, some sort of solutions on how to deal with this existential crisis that lies ahead of us or that we are already in the middle of. So I think that's very, very important to know that solutions reporting is something young audiences want. But in general, I mean, everybody across the globe seems to be very interested in solutions, but also in a diversity of opinions and constructive dialogue. We do have problems with destructive dialogues or with polarization, so to say, in most countries worldwide, I'd like to say. So what can journalists do to help foster constructive dialogues? And I think one thing is they have to realize themselves that there is always more than just two opinions on one single topic. It's not just the pro and the contra. It's not just black and white. It's mostly, thousands of shades of gray in between. And I think journalists do really have to realize that, and they also have to, ask the different questions that really resonate with the complexity of these issues, and really take people seriously and take the complexity of people's views seriously. And I think that's something that really needs to change. Just, journalists very often just hunt for quotes. Give me your opinion in 20 seconds. And I think that's not very useful when we try to do something about polarization. And I think that's something I'd really love to work on much more, because polarization is one of the most important topics of our times, and journalism is not really well equipped to handle this situation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this just raises another question, and I know it's very difficult to answer, but to have maybe a look in the future, because you said, and I think you're totally right, that we shouldn't, as journalists, just have two quotes, ask people, give me your opinion right away, because sometimes it's very complex. But on the other hand, it's also that it would take so much more time, and who is going to pay for that? So is that the media houses? Is that ads? So do you have any kind of idea for that? How could that look like in the future to have more really constructive journalism out there?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult question, and that's popping up always when you start to talk about solutions reporting that needs maybe a little bit more time to research the solution and not only the problem, or to ask more questions, to get out more of the complexity of the matter. But at the end of the day, we do really have to, ask ourselves, with digitization, do we still need to produce as many articles as we did when we had to fill, a whole newspaper every day? Or could we just decide to produce less, but more relevant stories every day? I mean, that's something, journalists really have to sort out. What does digitization mean for journalism, not only on the technological side, but also on the content side? Is it really necessary to deliver news in real time? When everybody can get the news on Twitter by all these reporters, that the mayor of Ramallah just, cited, who are not really journalists, but who are, broadcasting information. So what is the journalist's job then? I think the journalist's job is maybe sometimes to slow down a little bit and to give more context, and then maybe produce one article less, one video less, but go more into depth and really create value for users, viewers, listeners.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and very important to choose quality over quantity sometimes. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting if we talk about that. For instance, a person we work with a lot, Josué Rivas, who has spent a lot of time on Standing Rock protesting the pipeline, but also worked at this fellowship at the New York Times and other news outlets. So saw from both sides, and what he says is like, so for news outlets like the New York Times or other big news outlets to send someone to Standing Rock, take a few pictures, take a few quotes, and then go back and claim objective storytelling is, as a white person going into that space, you're never rooted in the protocols, he called it. You're never rooted in a language. So what you are shooting or what you are capturing is always a reflection of your own image. And there were a lot of journalists there, a lot of photographers there that were rooted in the protocol. But that's less interesting because then we see this framework of mainstream media that is so much more about the individual and the ego and the hierarchy. So it's also a question of who do you reach out to do the storytelling. And that doesn't have to be that much more time consuming as if you look at who is already there or who is present, who has some sort of agency or is rooted in some kind of protocol. And I think that's something that we don't do enough, or that hasn't gotten enough attention or isn't really structured in a way that we could utilize it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point, and maybe Ellen also to forward one more question on that for you, because I think collaborations like between journalists, for instance, from Germany and the country wherever we do the report on might be one element. So is that a part actually of constructive journalism, the way you define constructive journalism? So are you trying to do more?
I couldn't hear you very well. Could you just shortly repeat the question?
Sure. So do you think that collaborations might be a good element for more constructive journalism between journalists, for instance, from Germany who are working for a newspaper, and then also like journalists from other countries wherever the story is based?
Definitely. I mean, Deutsche Welle is working with like hundreds of correspondents around the world and is really relying on their in-depth reporting. And it's true that, they are really rooted in the situation and they know so much more background about all these stories we're covering. At the same time, I think there's still so much room for more collaborations. When I, get back to solutions reporting, for instance, we found out that people are definitely very much interested to find out more about potential solutions to problems they've got in their lives if they come from, say, other countries from the global south. So problems from Ghana might not be very interesting for people who are living in Bangladesh, but solutions for health service problems or education problems, they are definitely interesting for many people around the world. So especially if we look at constructive reporting, there is so much room for collaborations because, these days, almost all problems we're facing worldwide are international problems. Problems like the climate crisis are international, global problems. So journalism does really have to respond to that by also becoming, trans-border and international in its approach. And I think that would really, bring up so much more interesting stories and also potential solutions that would really offer some value for people in the audiences.
Yeah, and if I can make an addition to that, I think there's also for you, for us, coming from a privileged background or having the means, collaboration might also look at, okay, how can we share means and share tools for people to be able to tell their own stories. And I think that might be a very important next step to take internationally if we want to create more room for different perspectives instead of sending someone to get rooted into why not learn people how to use cameras and do reporting. I think that's much more important than, well, as we see in India, it's, yeah, that's what creates, I think, the diversity that we need.
There's a question. Amazing. You can, yeah, just step forward to the microphone, please.
Is this working? Yeah. My name is Truls Lee. I've been for 25 years a newspaper editor, and I was starting in a daily newspaper, going to a weekly, and as Ellen is saying here about the quality of journalism, the content, we turn it into a monthly and then now quarterly. So I was working for Le Monde Diplomatique, for example, which is a newspaper in the background, a kind of quality journalism. But there is a problem about as they say, the brain is 4 times more attentive to dangers. So when you talk about positive news, you don't get that audience to read a newspaper, then you have an economic problem. So there is a kind of issue in the ground here about how can we turn a newspaper into be positive and when the money income is coming from the dangers. So I'm just asking that maybe to Ellen.
Yeah,
is it a state-supported newspaper we talk about, or what is it?
That's a very important question, and it's true. The brain, because of its evolution, it's even 5 times more attentive to danger and negative news than it is to positive news, which is also the reason why the news do seem to be so overwhelmingly negative, right? So what can we do about it? I don't think that the solution is positive news. Positive news is not relevant news, that's for sure. But what is relevant then? I guess we do really have to report about the problems just as rigorously as we have to report about solutions. So we cannot deny that there are so many important problems out there that we need to report on. But we should not just, concentrate on the negative aspect of them. We should also keep an eye on who is already working on solving these problems, who is trying their best, who's already achieved something. Is there something in it we can learn from? So try to do the full circle of news. Start with the problem, always start with the problem, but then also turn to the solution. And I think that's like the best quality journalism we can really get.
Thank you so much. Are there any more questions yet? Okay, I would like to have ask one more question, Sumaya Musa, because you're the only one in this round who's not a journalist, but rather the person who's asked probably by journalists a lot of questions, and as a politician probably more often than other people. So we talked about the film, but that's a special case. So from other interviews, is there anything you can think of what in a bad way journalists often do where you feel angry about maybe or wonder about, or on the other hand something, do you have a positive story for us where we could learn from, where you feel like, oh, okay, that's a way how journalists should ask or write stories?
I think we have always to look for the 2 sides of the story. We have to give enough space for these 2 sides of the story. Otherwise, you will go to the square of destructive informations, not only journalism, but also informations. So a good interview, a good dialogue, a good journalist is the one who is trying always to find and to give enough and equal spaces for the different parties of the story. I think we have also to try to understand that many of the careers that we used to have in this world is now disappearing. What is really dangerous is also to have the journalism as a disappearing career because of the many ways of telling the story from different point of views. So when we were in real contact with a blacksmith or a carpenter 20 or 50 years ago, there was a need for them to be in direct touch with them. Nowadays, we have everything from a store. Don't make journalism as a store because we are going into digitization.
Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time, so thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your thoughts and experience and insights. That was really interesting. Yeah, I took away some really, really good thoughts, and thank you for the fruitful discussion here.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the second part of the Human Rights Forum and the second day of it. As you have maybe seen, making a hybrid festival with 2 hubs is challenging, but we are also thankful that our Indian colleagues are joining us. They are also now with us in the room, but just not in the big screen, because as you are sitting in the audience and don't want to be on the big screen while watching presentations, I think the other way around is the same, but they will join us at a later point. For now, it's my pleasure to hand over the mic to Vasilios, my colleague and the responsible person for press at Action Against Hunger, who will moderate the keynote, and then we are all looking forward to a pitch, which is on a constructive documentary, I would say. Thank you so much, and have a lovely second session.
Dear all, we had a wonderful start today with the talk with Marcus and the discussion on constructive journalism. I have the pleasure to introduce the next highlight for today. Let me step back a bit. In the wake of the genocide in Rwanda in 1995, the UN founded IRENE networks, which means Integrated Regional Information Networks. A humanitarian news agency to help humanitarians better understand and respond to emergencies, or even to prevent future disasters. This news agency today is called The New Humanitarian and is an independent non-profit news organization. Our guest today joined The New Humanitarian in 2018 as the site's first executive editor. She has over 70 years of international newsroom, op-ed, editorial development experience at the New York Times and lived all over the world. Our guest began her career in non-profit media in post-communist Eastern Europe, where she helped to establish the region's first post-Soviet journalism training centers. Stories for the Common Good, with journalism from the heart of crisis. Please give a warm welcome to Josephine Schmidt, the executive editor of The New Humanitarian.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting The New Humanitarian to take part in today's discussions on storytelling for the common good. It's a pleasure to pause for part of an afternoon to celebrate storytelling and storytellers from around the globe, and consider with all of you, both those of you who are here and online, how our work can be even more impactful and equitable in reimagining a better future for those who are at the heart of our stories. I don't think any of us question the power of storytelling, or we wouldn't be here. I'll just add, I find it really humbling to be here in the Berlin Film Studios, which is a place that's been dedicated to storytelling and filmmaking for more than a century, beginning at a time when film was nearly as new as TikTok is today. And to me, that alone speaks to the power of storytelling, really to the need to try to understand and connect by tapping one of the oldest human instincts. Tell me a story. Tell me your story. Help me understand. At the New Humanitarian, which, as you just heard, was founded by the UN, and we are now a nonprofit independent newsroom. At the New Humanitarian, we're journalists, and we use storytelling as part of our work to amplify the voices of people around the globe. Women, children, men who are going through what are likely the most traumatic events of their lives. Their stories are what often push policymakers, governments, taxpayers, and others in position of power toward the change that can turn lives around. Our journalism has spurred change that includes government decisions about funding relief efforts, lobbying for investigations into claims of sexual abuse and exploitation, and examination of EU migration policy. At the New Humanitarian, and for those of you whose fingers are itchy, our web address is thenewhumanitarian.org if you want to check us out. We exclusively cover humanitarian crises. That's our beat day in and day out. Our tagline is journalism from the heart of crises, which means that we are constantly reporting on people whose lives and livelihoods have been upended by wars or the aftermath of conflict, ongoing militia conflicts, political unrest and faltering governments, environmental hazards, think of the earthquake in Haiti, and the lack of stewardship of our planet, the impacts of climate change often felt most strongly by people who are already living in precarious situations and now confront food shortages, flooding, droughts, and more. That means we're covering Syria, Yemen, Ethiopia, 10,000 people under a bridge at the US-Mexican border, all issues I'm sure you've heard about. We're also covering issues that many of us may not be as aware of. Militia and jihadist violence ongoing in Nigeria, the Philippines, so many other places. The root causes of displacement and migration, the hard work of building peace. We report on crises over time, so we look at stories from both ends of conflict. Health crises, including pandemics, and epidemics like Ebola. I would like to tell you a little bit about how we do that coverage. And in looking at how we carry out our coverage, let's start with this. Storytelling and journalism are not always easy companions. We journalists like to think of ourselves as objective. We report the facts, we tell it as it happens. We don't take sides. On the other hand, storytelling demands many, many subjective decisions on the part of the teller. What part of a story is told, by whom, through what frame, to what end. In the Anglo-American tradition, journalists are not usually advocates. We are not the ones making the change. We provide tools, the information that can spur and inform change. We're only the messenger, we say, informing the world. We give you the facts. You decide what they mean. The problem is, when you're dealing with massive humanitarian disasters or cascading crises, one on top of the next, the basic questions of objective journalism, the old who, what, when, where, how, they don't work anymore. Such large-scale suffering defies imagination, hundreds of thousands, tens of millions. What do numbers like this mean to readers and viewers? 270 million people are expected to face acute food shortages this year. 80 million people have been forcibly displaced from their homes. 216 million people will be forced to migrate within their own countries by the impacts of climate change by 2050. What do these numbers mean to us as we click through on our phones or rush to pick up our kids from school? How do we even begin to think about any of that, much less how to change it? So media audiences often turn away, bombarded by statistics. Traditional journalism is often an extractive industry, and there are reasons for that. Reporting on crises often means reporters parachute into a disaster area and extract the basic facts. There's 10,000 migrants under that bridge on the US-Mexico border. Winter is coming to the displaced persons camps in northern Syria. Climate change will destroy lives in Bangladesh. Do audiences connect with that coverage? Occasionally. But study after study points to compassion fatigue, to audience burnout, Who wants to hear about people who are 4 time zones away, living lives you can't even fathom, and stuck in a situation that makes you feel really bad and maybe even really guilty for your nice life, but you can't do anything about that? An academic survey done a couple years ago concluded that the more negatively people feel about consuming a news story, quote, the less likely they were to voice their opinions or take actions to make the world a better place, unquote. So that's where the power of storytelling comes in. At the New Humanitarian, we see storytelling as an antidote to the hopelessness at the core of much humanitarian coverage. Our work is fact-based, of course, and we hope it's fair, offering a 360-degree view of a situation or noting when the perspective is biased in one direction or another. Our work is also centered on the people whose lives are at the heart of our coverage, on their voices. The people in so much coverage, so much news of humanitarian crisis are anonymous. They're groups, refugees, migrants, displaced victims, survivors, people in need. Tell a story, though, one centered on whole people, and everything changes. What happens when that migrant becomes the dad of a dead toddler on a beach much like the one where you vacationed? What happens when girls who are denied an education because they are, well, girls, become a girl named Malala, who was nearly killed by the Taliban and now campaigns to ensure that girls everywhere can receive an education? In our reporting at the New Humanitarian, we've seen what happens when news reports say on the banning of internet service on the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh are centered on the lived experience of those residents, on people like Mohammed Elias, a Rohingya civil society leader. Everyone can take information and pictures and do their work, he told us, only we can't. We are living like in a zoo. That report on how internet bans are cutting Rohingya refugees off from the outside world was cited by a petition to the International Criminal Court to hold hearings in Asia. Or consider what happens when rumors of jobs for sex schemes taking part as part of the Ebola aid response in Congo turn into testimonies from more than 50 women who were brave enough to share their stories. You won't find a single person who will talk to you about this. A local researcher in Beni told our reporter, Robert Flummerfelt, after he had repeatedly heard those rumors, often hanging out in bars with aid workers. People laughed me off the phone, he said, when he started calling around about those rumors. More than a year later, Flummerfelt and local reporters, whose names were withholding over security concerns, were able to identify and contact dozens of women, earn their trust, and work with them to share their stories in interviews in which sometimes the women's voices broke, their hands trembled, and tears rolled down their cheeks. None expected justice, they said. They just wanted their stories to be heard so other women wouldn't experience the same thing. Their stories were heard. More than 20 major mainstream media outlets, including the Times of London, the New York Times, the BBC, France 24, plus many outlets in Congo, covered our investigation, which we did in partnership with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. The WHO and NGOs have vowed to follow up, and officials from the UN Secretary General to representatives of governments have signaled outrage. None of the women we spoke to expect much will be done, though the UN has appointed an independent panel to investigate, and that report will be released this month. We made the choice to tell those stories, which was in itself a subjective decision. In fact, we make decisions every day that shape how information will be received and what its impact may be on those who are at the heart of our coverage. As journalists, we live with our belief in our objectivity. By doing so, maybe we're shirking some of our responsibility, not acknowledging the great power that is in our hands every day. Power to do good and to do harm, the power to decide what is covered, what is the news, to decide who tells the story and thus what that story, and thus how that story is told and from whose perspective. We have the power to decide who is a victim and who is a mom by the name of Gabriella selling ice from her home to try to make enough money in the face of COVID lockdowns to send her kid to school in a new country where they've recently arrived. So here are a few things we as journalists at the New Humanitarian consider when we're telling a story rather than providing only the hard-edged facts of news journalism. Whose story is this to tell? We believe it's not our or my story, it's the story of those who are at the heart of humanitarian crises. Let's ask them what the story is, why they are telling it, how they would like to tell it, what they hope will come of it. Let's use their words, not a paraphrase. If security permits, let's use their names and give some sense of who they are as human beings. There's a huge imbalance of power in the relationship between journalist and source. We try to shift that power toward the person who is telling the story. We ask ourselves, how can we be honest about the stories we're telling, about where we're starting from? Before we can begin to tell a story, we need to ask, how did we get here? This is about avoiding false narratives, about acknowledging the biases we may bring unknowingly to the reporting. Take coverage of Haiti, which is often described by US and other media as, quote, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. That may be a fact, but does it help us tell the real story of Haiti? We thought not, and thanks to our investigative editor, Paisley Dodds, who covered Haiti for a number of years, we now include this context in all our Haiti coverage. Although Haiti became the world's first Black republic in 1804, it was forced to pay billions to France in order to secure its freedom. That crippling debt, combined with decades of dictatorships, natural disasters, political and environmental mismanagement, a long US military occupation, and a debilitating US trade embargo, has prevented Haiti from making economic headway. That's a bit different than poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I mentioned earlier that we see storytelling as an antidote to the hopelessness that colors so much coverage of humanitarian crises. You also heard earlier that we were founded by the United Nations following the Rwanda genocide, out of the belief that objective, field-based reporting of humanitarian crises can help reduce the impact of and even prevent humanitarian disasters. I wasn't part of IRIN or the New Humanitarian then, but I am immensely proud of that legacy, which is one born of hope, that information, that sharing fact-based, contextualized stories might help improve or even avoid some of the worst human-to-human behavior imaginable or even unimaginable. In telling stories, I like to think that we at the New Humanitarian choose hope. I'm not talking about hope in the sense of rainbows and flowers and ice cream and the naive belief that everything will be all right or even better anytime soon. I'm talking about it in the and then what happened sense, in the sense of opening the way forward, of allowing us to at least begin to think about change. Powerful storytelling, whether by journalists or filmmakers or activists, allows us to ask what comes next, or to at least ask, and then what happened? It allows us to consider what's possible. I'd like to leave you with words from one of the people whose story was told with the New Humanitarian, Dr. Ammar Derwish. He's a Yemeni physician who wrote How Coronavirus Hit Aden, a Yemeni doctor's diary. He wrote it last year, about 5 months into the pandemic, when pandemic doom stories and hopelessness filled the media. Ammar is a doctor who was, on his own time and with his own funds, tending people throughout his neighborhood. He took notes of his work on his phone, day by day. We were introduced to him by a journalist friend of his, and we talked to him about whether he would want to tell his story and how we could do that. He ended up sending us notes by WhatsApp, day by day, for weeks and weeks. Power outages were frequent. He was sick in the midst of all this. He lost family members and friends, so it took some time. Our Mideast editor, Annie Slemrod, went back and forth with him to turn those notes into a story that documented the toll of the virus on his community, his family, and himself. We found a Yemeni illustrator, Adli Mirza, whose work helped set the tone for the piece. We worked with Ammar to have him record parts of the diary in his own voice, hoping to reach even more people through audio, hoping to make an even stronger human-to-human connection, voice to ear. That piece went on to win awards, to be picked up by the BBC and other mainstream media, some of whom interviewed Ammar. Here's what he shared in the introduction to the piece. I think it speaks eloquently of the power of storytelling from the heart of crises, of the hope that propels the act of storytelling. I never thought I would write something like this, and I did not plan for it to be published, he said. I never thought that my notes would make a difference to anyone. I still believe they might not, but I want to share this experience. Maybe some people care. Thank you.
Josephine, thanks so much for this inspiring speech and the insight you gave us to the new humanitarian. We have 10 minutes left for questions. I have lots of questions, but in case our audience wants to participate and ask questions, we have a microphone over there. So please feel free. And let me start.
Okay.
One of the sentences which really impressed me in your speech was the phrase storytelling as an antidote of hopelessness. And in my mind, I had the idea, what does that mean for the people working for you, for the journalists working for you?
What does it mean for them in terms of how do we look at stories and find stories? I think that for us, it means that for the stories we cover, we're not a breaking news outlet. So the who, what, when, where, that is already out there. We have that. It means that we want to go beyond all that and understand how what is happening impacts people at the heart of these situations. It means we want to ask what would make things better, how did they get here, what story do they want the world to hear. What it means really is engagement. It means that we want to be engaging with the communities we're covering. We're not going in solely to extract some information and leave.
Thank you. And you also talk about some of the limits of objective journalism, especially nowadays where the media is attacked by lots of different organizations of people. My question is, if you say that, as I understand you, what you are trying to do is also kind of like value-orientated journalism. And what's the difficulty to do exactly that? Because objectivism also is like, when we think about journalism, this is like objectivism, facts-based. This is something like very essential to that.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And there are conversations going on in newsrooms all over North America, all over Europe, just about this, and whether the idea that a journalist always must be an objective being. I won't even say human being, because often the thought has been, as a journalist, you never reveal your political affiliations, your biases, even moving to the point of calling the climate crisis a crisis was hailed as a big deal, right? 3-4 years ago, The Guardian and other media took a stand that we are calling this a crisis. Great, that's really good. It's also really sad that we have to get to the point where we're comfortable speaking out that way. I think that for us, all of the work we do, we want it to be fact-based, but we want to be sure that the facts are not the facts that are coming just from a single perspective. In our case, often a single Western-oriented perspective. You know, the humanitarian sector, which we cover, has long been seen as a sector based in the West. It's long been seen and criticized as promoting white savior mentality. And in fact, I'm sure many of you know more than I do, but in fact, most of the workers in that sector are local workers in the Global South. So we want to be very sure that we are not just parroting back the facts as they are shown and given by those who are at least optically in charge.
Thank you. Then you talked also about the background of the new humanitarian. More than 20 years after, I know you weren't there from the beginning, but more than 20 years after, what would you say has changed
What has changed in the way we report?
The way you work and the way you report, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can really only speak over the last 3 years when I've been there. I think, well, for one, if we want to look big picture, and again, you all know so much more than I do, but I think the sheer scale of humanitarian crises has changed. Just the sheer numbers of people we are talking about who are in need of some sort of assistance has multiplied over these last 20 years for sure. So what we cover is absolutely relentless. I think for us in the last few years, in order to try to focus some of our coverage, we have been attempting to focus on what we call, using a phrase that we're not comfortable with, but we haven't yet found a better one, so we welcome it if you guys all have an answer, we call forgotten crises. And these are crises that are not routinely covered by mainstream media. And so this allows us to really go to places such as Syria or Yemen, where yes, we know something is happening, but to look at stories that would not would not traditionally be told, that don't have the usual sort of click through of mainstream news.
Thank you. And if you think about the future, what would you say are the main challenges if you think in the sense of your humanitarian journalism?
Well, I think the main challenges are some that I alluded to in my talk just now. Just again, the sheer magnitude of what we're talking about just keeps growing and growing. So how do we overcome audience fatigue? With audience fatigue, compassion fatigue, then it snowballs, because if media audiences, the general public, do not want to understand or hear about what is happening about humanitarian need, there's going to be less impetus, less of a commitment among governments to fund many of these needs. And so then it just becomes a spiraling circle. So I think keeping the audience's attention, being able to find ways to tell stories that really connect with people is an ongoing challenge, and one that I have to say is difficult to face every day, but one that also brings immense pleasure when we're able to bring some of the stories that I mentioned and some of the stories that you'll see on our site to readers.
All right, thank you.
You guys must have one question or one comment for us.
Yeah, please. We have a microphone over here.
Hi there, my name is Franz Böhm, and our team also regularly works in crisis zones. And in your speech, you mentioned that you sometimes use sort of fake names for people who can't be published by their own original names. I can imagine that this is a very difficult situation to earn a relationship based on trust. I was just wondering if you can share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I mentioned not being able to share names of some local reporters who were working with us in Congo. We, on that story, which was the investigation into sexual abuse and exploitation in the Ebola response, we of course couldn't share the names of the women who were telling their stories, which really was absolutely heartbreaking, because it seemed as if their names were really the last shred of dignity they had left. But to keep their privacy, we could not share their names. And in fact, I think that in an odd way, being able to commit to their privacy did help build trust in that way. I think what you were speaking to was maybe how do we build trust with the audience if we can't use a reporter's name? And that's a great question. When we're not able to use a reporter's name, we try to explain as clearly as we can without revealing someone's identity why we can't do that. Yeah, it's a terrible place to be in, but first and foremost, when we're telling stories, we need to think about the safety of not only our reporters but our sources. We do, I will just add that in terms of building trust, we do try to be as transparent as possible if we are embedded or working with an NGO or with the UN. If we've taken transportation from the UN, we will make a note of that in the story somewhere. If we have, we're a grant-funded organization, if we're writing about an organization that also funds us, we want to be as transparent as possible. With our reporters, most of whom we can identify, we want to be very transparent about where they are. We use a dateline, what their background is, etc.
One more last question.
Hi, I'm Marie. I'm a journalist for DW Deutsche Welle. I was wondering, you mentioned that the way you report is obviously different from a news outlet like, I don't know, say the New York Times, because it's background stories that you focus on more, not the who, what, when, where. How does the actual concrete work of your reporters differ from that of other news outlets in terms of maybe how long you spend with the protagonist or your research process concretely? How is that different?
Yeah, I think that is a great question as well, and one we think about often. I think we often, I won't call it the luxury of time, but we make time to spend more time on the ground. We are often not parachuting in. We're a small full-time newsroom. We have editors around the room, a handful of editors, but we have reporters who work with us, who are based around the world. Some of them will write for us once in a lifetime. Some of them write for us 5 or 6 times a year on a repeat basis. We also have deep networks of contacts built up among researchers, among people working in the humanitarian sector, et cetera. So I think when a story breaks for the mainstream media, we've already been there. We have long been there. We already have a network of people. And what we're covering is not, we're always looking to find where can we add value to what the mainstream media is doing. So oftentimes that comes in context, in adding context. Oftentimes that comes through the fact that we're there after they leave. We stay long term. And I think as compared to many mainstream media, we will, as I said, take time. The SEA investigation I spoke to you about took us more than a year and a half. Part of that time was because we were delayed by COVID, but it would have taken time at any rate. A story we published last week, a really beautiful reporter's notebook out of Burundi, which was a first-person account of our reporter following the Truth and Reconciliation Commission workers as they were exhuming graves and speaking to families as they were finding their loved ones. We worked on that for over a year with him. He worked on that. So we take the time that's needed to really understand what's going on and really to build the trust that allows people to tell their stories.
Thank you very, very much. Josephine Schmidt for the New Humanitarian. She'll be around here for a while, and we have a workshop on humanitarian journalism later online. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here with our next film pitch that we are presenting. And I would like to ask Wim Wenders on stage to present his new project, which is called Piece by Piece, and we will discuss how we can actually understand the word peace and how a film can make, hopefully, a difference. Would you like to come on stage, please? And then we can show the video.
Sind nicht mehr die Kriege und Könige, sondern die Dinge des Friedens, eins so gut wie das andere. Aber noch niemandem ist es gelungen, ein Epos des Friedens anzustimmen. Was ist denn am Frieden, dass er nicht auf die Dauer begeistert und dass sich von ihm kaum erzählen lässt?
There's nothing more obvious than mankind's overall need and craving for peace. Peace appears in almost everybody's wish lists and prayers, no matter which nationality, age, race, class, or gender. Everybody wants peace, and we take that desire for granted. However, there's an incredible discrepancy between how much people long for peace on one hand and how little they know about it or do about it on the other. Seriously, do we really know what it is? I challenge you, define peace in your own words, but without saying peace is the absence of war. Peace has got to be more than the absence of its negation. Let's face it, its opposite, war, has indeed much more of a stronghold on our imagination. There are so many movies about war. Count the films about peace. Think about it. You'll end up with one hand if you come up with films at all. Peace has to have more sex appeal. Yeah, it needs to concern us more and create more excitement. That is the goal of the film we suggest, and which we deem to be extremely urgent. To learn the language of peace from scratch. So we can all speak of peace and act for it with power, pride, and conviction. Hold this thought. Before I go on, I have to say one thing. And this is the key to the whole undertaking. I cannot stress it enough. This film cannot possibly become some sort of a goodwill declaration, another film with mostly good intentions, preached to those who are already converted. No, this film needs to be the opposite of what everybody would expect. It can't resemble anything you and I know already. It needs to be shocking, and yes, funny, amazing, and unpredictable. It needs to consist of many short pieces that confront the audience with all sorts of astonishing aspects of peace. I see all these short, cutting-edge films linked to a film form par excellence, the commercial. Yes, you heard me right. Imagine a row of mind-blowing commercials for the unknown product of peace. This kaleidoscope has to consist of crazy fictional films, of hilarious comedies, science fiction films, of stupefying short documentaries, of the most revealing essays, installations, animations. All of them doors into the unknown continent of peace.
We intend to invite talented filmmakers from different horizons, generations, and cultural backgrounds to create unique pieces of art that reflect their original visions about peace. So you could think of it as a collage where every bit has a life of its own, but takes another dimension when being shown as part of a greater whole. We are currently reaching out to international communication companies and agencies responsible for groundbreaking commercial or social campaigns. We aim to join forces with these inspiring creative minds and form a pool of writers and filmmakers to come up with a strong overall concept in terms of narrative, visuals, and ideas for the film, but also 20 to 30 treatments of synopsis for the different episodes. So basically, we'll take the best of the advertisement industry and the cinematographic art to create a mind-blowing experience around the idea of peace.
We have a German co-producer and distributor already attached, and we are now looking for international co-production partners. And very important for this project, we are looking for private equity partners, institutions and foundations that see the necessity to bring this important project to life.
Our future is either non-violent or we have no future at all. Martin Luther King said that. Only peace is the answer. Let's make a film on the way there.
Right.
There we go.
There we go. It's a very strong pitch. Thank you for that, Wim.
Thank you.
Of course, it will be a very philosophical film in a way that what is peace all about? And telling it, I find that very interesting that you want to tell it through little snippets and you call it advertising, like little commercials, commercials for peace. How did you come to that idea?
I came to that idea through the same dilemma that is in your title, Storytelling for the Common Good. It defines already our or my dilemma, and therefore I'm here to look for help. Storytelling, by definition, is trying to reach people. In storytelling, you're directing your stories to people who do not know it yet. You don't want to keep telling your stories to people who already know it by heart. You want to tell it to the others. I don't want to talk about peace to peacekeepers. I want to talk about peace to people who have forgotten what it is. And the other part, common good, peace is pretty much the base of the common good. All our common goods that we can sum up and that appear here in these days, all pretty much have peace in common. Peace will prosper. Common goods will prosper on the ground of peace. In the previous 2 hours, I heard two really important sentences here. They were spoken quite casually and they hit me. One was we as news tellers, fact tellers, storytellers are all part of the attention industry. Right. Wow. And the other line was, it was repeated twice, our brains are 4 to 5 times more attentive to danger and threat. And there you have our dilemma.
Very true.
How to talk about peace and make it interesting and reach all those who just couldn't be reached because of all the attention-seeking heat missiles that are in the air. And they're huge missiles. And they steal the attention of everybody on the planet, except those who are in trouble.
Very
true.
Very true.
We thought maybe we have to look for some storytellers who are not involved in the common good so far. For instance, a voice that is heard all over the world, but not yet in our context, are advertising people. There are some very smart storytellers there who know how to sell something. And we felt the idea of peace, and I hope I can say it as crudely, needs to be sold a little better. So maybe advertising people are possible partners, and there are good people working in that field, eager to contribute to the common good and not just to products. So we thought maybe we need to declare the common good, or peace in our case, as a product. And then there are other storytellers who send some of the big heat-seeking missiles into the world. They're people who make blockbusters. I don't know, probably a lot of you have seen Avatar. I saw it and loved it because there was this blue planet, and I love these people who lived there. They were very peaceful people, amazing people. And then there was this invasion, and I thought, oh boy, now they are in danger. And I was so much hoping that the upcoming conflict in that film was not yet again going to be another war. I hope these blue people had another answer. They had an answer that the planet could use. But instead, this movie that I really liked until then would go into showing us how these blue people would know how to solve the conflict, but no, it ended up as war. Planes against planes, people shooting. It became a full-fledged Star Wars again. And that made me realize the power of these storytelling, like James Cameron, was amazing. And they would have such great tools to tell other stories. If only the studios, and that line was also said before, we're part of an industry, would understand that mankind needs other stories and always the same story of wars. So that's why I'm here. That's why my team is here. We hope for allies. We need every ally we can get. We need every idea we can get. I got a great idea today from the mayor of Ramallah when he said part of an important issue in the resolution is, in the solution to the problem, is listen to different points of view. Most movies don't do that. Most movies have one point of view, and I hope that our film about the language of peace can make people listen, because it represents not just the philosophical point of view on peace, but also practical and maybe also adversary opinions on peace. So we're here to ask you for help.
Right, perfect. And we've got some amazing experts who are joining us for this discussion. And first of all, I would like to ask Ursula Schröder onto the stage. She is the director of the Peace Institute in Hamburg. Because what we discussed earlier is, and what we've heard today already is that, and you just mentioned, is that the drama, the disaster stories, are grabbing our attention. And I was wondering what you at the Institute for Peace and also for Security Policy what is your take on how can we sell peace better, that people listen?
Yeah, let me just say that I think I love the pitch. I like the idea and I agree with the challenge. We have peace, essentially, we have peace as a non-event. We have a concept of peace that we as peace researchers use a lot, that is the absence of something. It's not war, it's not violence. It's something to do with countering inequality, countering injustice, countering hunger. And it's much more difficult to come to a positive understanding of what this is supposed to be, what we mean, and also difficult to see how that is different from, say, development or other nice-sounding concepts. So I think the problem is very real, and storytellers don't like a non-event. It's difficult to tell stories around an absence. And the presence of war that is so dire on this International Day of Peace that we have here today, we see reports about violence, but we also see reports about peacemakers. And one thing that strikes me from peace research is that we need a different type of peacemaking at the moment. And I think this is something that might be interesting for you, because we have peacemaking capabilities in the UN system, the United Nations system. We have elite-level negotiations. We have a whole armada of things at the elite level. But warfare is no longer interstate. Warfare is within communities, across borders. It's transnational, very hard to contain. And we need, if we would like to come to world peace at some point, we need local peace. And so far, we have not looked closely enough at the different types of local pieces, if you like, that you need. And that needs to complement the large-scale United Nations international peacekeeping issues. And the local pieces is something that might also be interesting for film in different areas. So bringing the local and the international level together is something that I'd be interested in seeing.
That's why we called it piece by piece, because we realized we needed lots of different pieces, little pieces. They can be tiny, because as a sum, they will be something different. Pieces on pieces. We can't start with the overall concept. We have to start with pieces.
And can I ask why it's language of peace and not languages of peace?
Yes, but well, I thought peace as a general phenomena that had one language, so to speak, even if it's spoken in different languages. Yeah. But you're right, maybe we need to make it a plural to help that misunderstanding.
To be inclusive. Yeah, because in a sense, what we see...
Yes, you're right. The more I think about it, I thought about it as a philosophical term, but as a practical term, it needs to be plural. Yes.
Because
we'll do it. Next thing.
That was easy.
First step.
Because storytelling is about making stories more complex in this field, because we know that very simplified stories create division and they can create polarization. So in peace communities, it's all about multi-perspective views. It's all about the different perspectives that you mentioned in the pitch. It's all about the ways that grievances from different sides may be valid. And we need to listen to the grievances, and we need to deepen our stories and not make them more exclusive. And so we need different languages to see the different viewpoints, because sometimes a conflict can have multiple sources, and we need to understand them to see how we can transform them. So,
absolutely.
Yes. I would like to ask Manfred Nowak, human rights lawyer from Austria, to join us, because he will have an interesting point of view on this as well. Do we have him online? I can see him. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, and here you are. Welcome. You followed the discussion we've had so far. What is your point of view? What do you think the languages of peace? What is your take on this?
I also have a very broad understanding of peace. And I also would define it as the absence of something. And I would go back to Franklin Roosevelt's State of the Union speech when he talked about freedom from fear, which in fact is freedom from violence. People are afraid of violence. And then on the other hand, freedom from want, which means freedom from poverty. And that's the kind of the background of the post-World War II architecture. On the one hand, international peace and security, and on the other hand, development. And of course, both is linked with human rights. So I would think that people have a very, very strong desire to live in freedom from violence. And any kind of violent society is not a peaceful society. And that is, of course, first of all, war, and whether it's international war or civil war, and similar forms of extreme violence like terrorism, organized crime. But also when we speak about domestic violence, if women and children are beaten up at home or in schools, peer-to-peer violence, then we are living in a society that is not peaceful. So for me, peace really means absence as much as possible of violence. And I agree also what you said before, that's closely linked also to freedom from poverty. If we are living in a highly, and what we do in these neoliberal times, where economic inequality has been extremely on the increase, if we are living in a society where you have absolute poverty on the one hand and affluence on the other side, and the rich have to retreat to gated communities, this might be a very rich society on average, like the US society and others, but still it's not a peaceful society, because people always feel this huge difference. I cannot live in peace even if I'm rich. If I live in a country where I know that next to me there is absolute poverty, people are starving, people are hungry, people are dying of starvation, etc., people are homeless, etc. If that is not a peaceful society, and of course it leads to the United States is the best example. It leads to a society where then everybody has weapons, and in order to defend themselves against whoever else, that is for me a highly violent society. And of course, the media, the way how we are portraying, we are even celebrating violence, and in most of the Hollywood and many other movies, that is leading also to a society that is not a peaceful society. So for me, some kind of redistribution of wealth, of income, solidarity among the people is a very, very important ingredient of a peaceful society. And the final point is that, because you talked about peacekeepers, in the old days we simply had peacekeepers. That meant blue helmets of the United Nations that are ensuring a ceasefire, but that was not peace. In order to develop after a conflict a peaceful society, you need much, much more. You need peace building in the best sense of the word. And peace building means that you have to develop democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and of course, you have to start by truth. You have to know what happened before, during the conflict, and only on the basis of truth and justice, you can then develop reconciliation.
Right.
As long as you don't have some form of reconciliation and justice, you won't find a peaceful society. You might have the absence of armed conflicts, but it's not a peaceful society. So peace is much more. Peace and security are very strongly linked with each other, that we can feel, I can go out on the street and I don't have to be afraid of violence.
Right. I think that will be the challenge to translate that into storytelling and advertise for the peace, that we get rid of the arms and the drama and the war. Would you have a quick question to Manfred Nowak, or what is your?
I love what you said. I subscribe to all of it. But how to make that public knowledge? How to put that into all these heads that are not convinced yet, that are not of your opinion? How to not just have peacekeepers, but also peacemakers, peace seekers, peace builders? I mean, we need all these skills to be sharpened, and not just by a few, but by many. And to bring that out, to make that popular, that is highly different. That is the dilemma that this headline is defining: storytelling for the common good.
Right.
It is Sisyphus work, but I hope enough people can get it done.
Yes. We might have a person here that is joining us online. It is the artist, or the first digital UN ambassador, Elix, and we have joining us from Paris, Yassine Aitkachi. I'm very, very happy that you are here, and thank you so much for creating a little International Peace Day, Elix, for us today. Of course, I think what is amazing for having you speak to us is that with Elix, you are already trying to speak to other people. The UN is obviously looking for having you as Elix speaking to maybe also younger people, but Elix is a language that can speak to everyone. What is your motivation behind Elix, and what is Elix's role?
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm sorry not to be with you in Berlin. And this was an amazing pitch, and I really loved what I heard until now. And Elix is exactly about what we talk about. And because we talk about common good, let's talk about common, the notion of common, because as you said, we have many different languages, we have many different cultures, we have 193 countries at the United Nations, and it comes with sometimes very different views. And the problem begins with language. The problem begins when you try to say something and someone else listens to something else, and we don't have a common language. It's very difficult, and even with translation, it's very delicate. And what Wim Wenders is calling to is building a culture of peace. And in fact, absolutely, peace is not just the counter form of war. It's not just the absence of war. It's the presence of negotiation. It's the presence of multipartism, the fact that we choose to talk instead of fighting, and for that we need a common language. Elix is built on that. Why is it a common language? First of all, because it doesn't speak. It doesn't have a language. He has a language of peace, because yes, the very first thing everyone on earth can do is smiling. Smile is already a kind of message, and as you see this wide open arms, it's the opposite of the fist like this. Is open to the other, because to have peace you need not an enemy but an opponent, and to choose another path than fighting. And Elix, through his universal language, is also drawing. Everyone on earth did draw at one moment, and this moment most of the time is the childhood, and it's not just for children, but everyone has a connection with childhood, because we remember this moment when everything is new, everything is a new experience, and you don't have war when you're a child, you have game. It's totally different. And I think also in the storytelling, why do we prefer, when I say we, I just talk about the blockbusters, because Wim Wenders talked about Avatar, and it's true that it's appealing. You have something, you have a kind of tension, you have a fight, you have an action scene, and we like that because we are like kids playing in the garden. But it has to stay, to keep a game, not to become a reality. And the people who like this kind of fictional violence, they are not necessarily violent people. If you put them in a condition or in a context of violence in the street, they will be totally overwhelmed by this new situation, and it's totally different. But to build a culture of peace means also building the culture of communication, of language. How do we discuss with another one to avoid the tension to become violence? How to respect the other? And all the Elix project is based on that. And so I produce also the images for all the human rights, the 30 articles of the human rights for the purpose that anyone on earth, even if you can't read, you can understand the topic, and you can understand that we have at least some common elements that allow us to communicate with each other without being a negotiator, without being a specialist of peace, just to try to find what we have in common before to look for what we are different for.
Thank you so much, Yassine. I think you are talking about a lot of points here that will be very, very valuable. I see that Wim is taking notes. Do you have, is there anything you would like to ask, Yassine?
Yep, I think Felix needs to appear in our film. Felix needs to appear. I think he is a great communicator. I just was introduced to him a few minutes ago when I saw him, and I understood immediately how Felix can talk to not just the children, but to everybody. So Felix, we hope we can cast Felix in our movie.
With pleasure, of course. And you know, there is something very, very important that I wanted to add, because we are also in a new situation, because for many centuries, war was a topic of negotiation between human groups. But today, as said the UN Secretary General, we have to make peace with nature. And we have a very few time for that, because it means also that we can be all in the same human group. We all face the same danger. That's also what we faced with the virus and the COVID. And it was not a human group versus another human group. And we are totally in this kind of narrative situation, like you know, these action movies, where you have violence and car chase and so on. But this is with, of course, climate change, but also biodiversity loss. And I think it's a matter of peace, not as a counterform, but as a building, as a form. And this is also the meaning of this Day of Peace today, because the topic is the equitable and sustainable world.
Right.
That brings peace.
Exactly. I think that gives us a lot of thought when we go into the workshop now.
Yeah, look forward to it.
And I want to thank Yassine, thank you so much for joining us. Manfred Nowak, Ursula Schröder, thank you so much for being with us today and helping to understand how we can sell peace to a lot of people. Not the already converted one.
Schmidt from before. That was an enlightening speech. Thank you.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I had the pleasure to moderate this morning, and now there was unfortunately a last-minute change, so I'm jumping in here and have some questions ready for the panel. Journalism, activism, joining forces, ? So, as always, you're all invited to ask questions as well. We have, again, panelists here and also 2 journalists joining us again online from India. So, I would like to welcome here in the studio Graham Smith, who is an author and consultant with 9 years of on-the-ground experience in Afghanistan, starting in 2005, to my right. And then we have Jules Gurarat. I tried to pronounce correctly, but I failed. He is a French investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker. And then we have online Basha Singh, a senior journalist, documentary filmmaker and writer with over 25 years of experience. She is very well known for her work on Dalits, who are the lowest class, even if the caste system doesn't exist anymore. In India, they belong to the lowest class in India and are struggling a lot, as I learned also in Writing with Fire, a great documentary. She's also working on other minorities and women issues and trying to bring those issues to the mainstream media. And then we also have Geeta Devi joining us. She is the chief reporter at Khabar Halaria, which is, as we learned also this morning, the newspaper and the only newspaper in India that's led by female journalists, and she has worked as a reporter for almost 12 years now. So yeah, what a great panel again. It's so great to have those experts with us for this important topic. And I would like to start with you actually, Graham. Since we are a bit behind schedule, we skipped one part where we were supposed to talk, the 2 of us, but I would like to start now. Can you tell us a bit more about your work? You have reported from Afghanistan, from Moscow, from New Delhi, from Istanbul. What are the challenges you were facing or having or coming across while reporting from those crisis areas and those situations?
Yeah, I started off as a newspaper reporter And I think as a newspaper reporter, your job is to find the news, but the idea of what is new or what is noteworthy in a place that is very foreign to your own context is slightly more challenging in a place like Afghanistan. I started off as a crime reporter on the streets of Toronto, so if someone was stabbed in Toronto, that was quite unusual and noteworthy, and we would write a story about it. I then spent, most of my professional life in Afghanistan, and, okay, if someone is stabbed in Afghanistan, usually it never makes the news. And so you, as a journalist, you have to kind of think more broadly about what is happening and why it's noteworthy and to whom it's noteworthy in a slightly bigger way. At the moment, I'm working on issues related to the economic crisis in Afghanistan, and that's very important to a lot of the people in Afghanistan because they can't buy bread. Is that important to the outside world? Well, you try to make them care, but sort of translating that idea of what is important to the outside world is an added challenge in these contexts.
Yeah. And maybe as a follow-up question, since we are talking about journalism and activism, and if they're joining forces, I mean, you're probably definitely feeling as a journalist, but are there situations where you feel like more than an activist, or can that go together? And what's maybe also the thoughts in your head around that? Is that a struggle? Is that a problem sometimes, or can you be both at the same time?
I mean, I don't know. I've never been an activist, but so I don't want to speak for activists, but I assume that activists arrive in a situation with already some idea of, what the correct answer is or what the correct solution is. And at least for me as a journalist, maybe other journalists would be different, but for me as a journalist, I try to arrive in a situation not knowing the answer ahead of time. I don't know, maybe our fellow panelist would have some thoughts on that. But for me, yeah, I like to go into journalistic situations that surprise me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting, yeah. Maybe, to hand over exactly that question to you as well, Jules. So maybe you can also give us a bit of your thoughts on the difference between activism and journalism, and if you sometimes feel like that is mixing up, or that might be the same, you sometimes feel as a journalist and also as an activist.
Yes, I'm a member of Forbidden Stories since 2017. Forbidden Stories is a non-profit organization, but at the same time it's a consortium of international investigative journalists. It's gathering journalists from major media organizations such as Süddeutsche Zeitung in Germany, or The Guardian, The Washington Post, or Le Monde. And so we collaborate all together to pursue and continue the work of journalists that have been either jailed or harassed or killed. And we try to collaborate together and publish all together at the same time. And of course, when we started Forbidden Stories 4 years ago, the border between activism and journalism was central, because of course we are in favor of freedom of speech, the independence of the press. But at the same time, we didn't want to overlap on the work of NGOs such as Reporters Without Borders or CPJ in the United States that do an amazing job, but I think we have the same aim, but not the same means. And that was very important for us to have a strict Chinese wall between our two ways of doing our work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And also to forward similar questions to our colleagues in India. Do the two overlap for you as well, especially when it comes to reporting on stories that are not always covered or investigated by mainstream media? Do you sometimes feel like you are a journalist and as well an activist? So how is the division for you between the two?
I think this is a very important question, and it is looming large over all the journalists in, at least in India and the nearby countries. I just want to start from the Noam Chomsky's quote, which is much more relevant for us right now, when he says that he who controls media controls mind of people. And basically journalism has become, and especially because it has been a corporates and all those who are holding, so it is much more of the concentration of power and dealing with the power, how you are dealing with the power, how you want to express, what you want to focus. So as an Indian journalist, what I find that the main corporate media has become a sort of industry which is creating a perception in the favor of the people who are in the power. Big corporates, big industries, multinationals who want to just exploit the natural resources, or who want to take away the freedom of expression and the freedom. So in that scenario, what I find that as a journalist, my first and foremost duty is to report for the people who are just completely out, or on the issues, not only the people, the issues which are of national importance, which represent my country, and whose interest is guaranteed by my Indian Constitution. So I have to stand by Indian Constitution, and I have to see that those forces, those policies, those laws who are moving against, or who are not giving a right way of expression to the people who are marginalized, either by the big dams or the big policies. So those we have to put in agenda. But what has become that if I want to talk as a journalist about all these issues, be it on the issue of the minorities, Dalits, of the land rights, of the human rights, of the fundamental rights, the biggest thing is thrown on me that you have become an activist. But as a journalist, what I feel that if I don't report on these, I am not doing my justice to my profession. So there is a very clear-cut line where a journalist stands and where an activist stands. An activist, suppose if I take myself, I have been writing on the issues of women, on the gender justice, on the issues of the Dalit issues. In India, as you all know, there is a caste system, and there is a huge atrocity based on the caste. We have tribal people, indigenous people, whose rights have been taken away by the corporates and the governments. So if I want to write about them, so I'm doing a justice to my profession. And at the same time, there are activists who are raising this voice. And definitely, we can be a co-traveler to some extent. But our roles are different, because my basic role will not be to think and decide about the future of their movement or their issues. My basic duty is to report on that and to make my country, my people, and the world aware about it. These are the reasons we have to think, we have to fight for the justice, and we will stand along with it. So this is how I perceive my role, and this is the basic role a media person has to play, be it investigative journalist. If we are investigating, then definitely we are investigating about something which is going wrong in the system, which is against the country, against humanity. So this is the basic duty of a media person, of a journalist, to report about the truth. So this truth has to come out. And as a media person, I owe by the truth which stands in front of me, whatever challenge is safe. And right now when I am talking to you, this truth is in danger. The democracy structure is in danger, because so many journalists and media houses, especially the digital portals, are facing the threats of a different kind. So that's how I feel that the role of a media person and activist stands. They can be a co-traveler, but their role and their duties and their accountability are different and they address to different communities. Yeah.
Thank you. Jules, maybe to go into one of your fields of expertise and topics again, you co-directed the documentary series Green Blood. Could you tell us a bit more about the project itself?
Yes, the Green Blood project was gathering 45 investigative journalists in the world, and the idea is that environmental journalists, journalists that are covering environmental scandals in the world are very much targeted, either by governments, local governments, or multinationals. And we have noticed that there were several cases of journalists that have been either killed, have been jailed, were facing prison, because they were investigating the mining industry that is not a very well-known industry, but that is central, because of course the minerals are used in our daily life products. So we focused on 3 cases, two in India actually, journalists that were investigating on sand mafias, illegal sand mining that is supported most of the time by local governments, corrupt local governments. One journalist, Jagandra Singh, was set on fire. Another journalist we worked with, Sandhya Ravishankar, was facing very serious threats. We focused as well on gold mining in Tanzania and nickel mining in Guatemala. And what was, in a sense, very interesting is that all these journalists in all these different parts of the world were facing the same kind of threats. And I think one of the goals of the predators of the free press are to discredit these journalists and pretend that the revelation they make on contamination, pollution, violences, they do it because they are defending private interests of opponents, that they are activists. When these people are doing their jobs as journalists, they're reporting the news, they try to reveal things that were supposed to stay in the dark. And I think that's why I do believe in collaborative journalism, is that, of course, when you're gathering 45 journalists from different parts of the world, and that we are focusing all together at the same time during 6 or 8 months on these topics, you invert a bit the fight in these areas, because it's harder for corrupt governments or dirty multinationals to pretend that what we are reporting is fake news, or that our revelations are biased, because of course we have the influence of all these media organizations. We are backed up by a strong legal department in this media organization. So I think that's a way to defeat these people.
And I think what is really interesting is that you probably, on the topics you just mentioned, it was on pollution and environmental issues and human rights issues, and I assume during your research you came across and you had interactions with a lot of activists. They really call themselves activists, and I wonder, because we all have this, probably, even if we want to be objective, we have this compass that we sometimes read, this is right, this is wrong, and then we might tend to be more on the side of the activists. How do you make sure not to report one-sided, or do you know what I mean? Do you know these situations where you feel like, oh, this is the right thing? How can you balance those stories, basically?
It's true that it's hard, because in the areas where we report, the links between activists and journalists are very tight, obviously. When we were reporting in this Maya Quechua community in Guatemala, there are very strong links between the journalists, local journalists, and the activists, because they are fighting for the same goal. They want to have clean water, they don't want their hair to be polluted or things like that. But I think in our investigations, the activists are our sources. We rely on them, we rely on their work, because most of the time, we are focusing for 8 months, 10 months on one topic, which is a lot in nowadays journalism, but still these people have been working on these topics for years. So of course we rely on them, we rely on their work, but then what we have to do is to double check their information. To give you an example, again, in this community in Guatemala, they did some water samples to prove that there was high nickel concentration in the lake, where on which they rely on because they are fishermen. And at the same time, the government published other water samples, water tests, saying, no, it's not polluted. So of course our work is to try to prove that the activists are right, but we do it with our means, and we have to make sure that our evidence are, bulletproof in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And I would like to bring you in again, because I think you were really clear on, okay, I'm a journalist, this is what I do. You made really this division. But do you remember, what is your compass then, and how do you know you're right or wrong? And do you maybe also, I mean, that's two different questions, but ever had that situation where you felt like, okay, I'm speaking now to this activist, I'm trying to tell the story in the right way, I get this person, and then you feel like, I'm following this road more than I should?
I mean, I think you often don't know if you're right or wrong. And as a journalist, if you feel too much certainty about that, usually it's a warning sign. As you say, you have to feel like the product at the end is bulletproof. And the best way to know whether or not something is bulletproof is to fire a lot of bullets at it. So you create something, you say, I think this is the situation, I think this is right. You put it online, you put it in the public domain, and a lot of people attack it. And, this is a way that we as a society produce information, and it gets attacked from all sides, and maybe something survives, I just was reflecting on how wonderful it is to be connected to our friends in India. I actually used to work in India as a journalist. But, they are correct to say that investigative journalism is under threat. But I think it is also correct to say that investigative journalism as a profession is, for the first time in human history, a threat to power holders all around the planet Earth, which is a beautiful and wonderful thing. And I started my career as a newspaper reporter in the 1990s, before Twitter, before Facebook, before the existence of any online news websites, And at the time, to say that there were going to be, investigative journalists working on the conditions of Dalits in India, people would laugh at you. And now these things exist. And so, yes, I mean, it is very difficult work, very dangerous work, but it has an effect on the way power is used in countries all around the world today. And so that's something to be celebrated. At the same time as, you can express concern for the people on the front lines of this effort.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry to follow up again and again, but I just want to get this clear. Do you think it's in a way dangerous if journalists feel like to be activists at the same time, or if they feel like, oh, we are so close to activists? Do you see a danger in this? Because, I mean, there are obviously, as you said, it's really powerful, and journalists have a lot of power. So do you think it might be, yeah?
I mean, there's a reason why we have different words for the jobs. They're different jobs. And yeah, I think it is, I've been working in places where it is very dangerous to be mistaken for anything other than a journalist. Journalists in Afghanistan are under a lot of threat and under a lot of pressure. If you stick around for my film tonight, you will see a guy named Bismillah Watandost. He was both a journalist and an activist. He won peace in Afghanistan, and so he started sort of peace marches, trying to encourage the Taliban and the government to make peace. But at the same time, he is and was a journalist. And today, as we speak, he has sent messages saying that he's under a lot of threat in Kandahar city because the Taliban don't see him as a neutral journalist, and he's trying to escape the country. So, it's, it can be difficult and dangerous to blur those lines.
And in those fields you mentioned...
Can I just intervene?
Sorry?
Can I just make one point here?
Yeah, sure.
Just I want to say that because this discussion is very important. Right now, the whole world has seen how the Pegasus has come out. Basically, the Pegasus shows that how the people in the power, how the governments, different sovereign governments want to crush media, how they want to control our lives, and especially journalists. In India, 40 or more journalists were on the radar. Why? Because we were reporting. We were trying to bring the truth. And at this point, it's very important when media is being held by big corporates, big money is being invested. You see the kind of media holdings we are having in the country. I'm talking about India. Not only about India, it's a global phenomenon about which Noam Chomsky has written and many have written. So at this juncture, if we say that a journalist can be neutral, I don't find there is anything in the neutral for a journalist, because definitely we have to take stand. When a big corporate is funding you, giving me my salary or your salary, then how I am going to report against his business interest or her business interest, the corporation's interest. We have seen how the Coca-Colas or the whole water bottle industry or the soft drink industries have been working and operating in the third world countries, exploiting the water. Or even in India, how they have been playing with the environment and lives of the marginalized, most marginalized. So if I have to report about that, being as a journalist and as a citizen of my country, I have to take the stand that this move is unjust. If there is an atrocity, there is a war, then definitely as a human being, as a global citizen, as a journalist, I have to take a stand and I have to explain and bring out different news that how the war is dangerous, how the nuclear weapons are dangerous. So at that time, I can't say, no, being a journalist, I have to take this. Definitely, I have to check my resources, my sources, 1,000 times. I can't rely on the secondary data. But when the atrocities are happening across, when the media is being controlled and curtailed, our right to expression is being curtailed, there are thousands of FIRs on the journalists, journalists are being killed for speaking truth, then definitely it shows that when you speak to the power, and power is controlled by the corporates and big money. So this whole play of the political power and the economic power, media becomes a sandwich. So here we have to survive to tell the story, and at the same time, we have to take a stand of the justice, and we have to report so that our voice and the period in which we are living is reported, is reflected, goes across. And in India, we have seen from 2014 to now, two major incidents which I just want to put. One, there was a huge movement for the Citizenship Amendment Act. There's a movement for what is called Shaheen Bagh, which taken the international attention. And second, right now when I'm talking to you, there's a huge movement of farmers which got the international attention. And in the meantime, there was a COVID-19, Corona. The whole way it was reported against one religion. But the journalists like us stood by the side of the people and said that this is not the way to report. It cannot be against two communities. So these are the stand, I think, in the crucial moments, whatever is happening in Afghanistan and around, we have to stand by justice, we have to stand by humanity, and we have to see how our media reporting can bring a goodwill across. Thank you.
Thank you for the statement. We have, unfortunately, just not too much time left. So if you have any questions from the audience, please feel free just to step forward to the microphone that we placed there. And I see there's a question.
We have a journalist, a very wonderful journalist. She's here with the ground reports. She has been reporting. So if you can just give some minutes to her, so that would be wonderful. She came all the way to Delhi to speak for this platform.
Yeah, can we hear the question first and then we go ahead with your statement?
अभी कुछ चर्चा चल रही है ना उनकी.
Hello. Thank you very much. I have a quick question. What do you think about not the interdependency between activism and journalism, but collaboration between journalism and activism?
I think I was invited last year at the festival to present the work of Forbidden Stories and a documentary, and Anna, the director of the festival, asked me these questions 2 or 3 times, I think. And I think it's a good question. And at the time I was explaining her that, to speak just of our work, it was complicated to properly collaborate on the project with activists or NGOs. But actually this year we published with other media organizations the Pegasus project. Pegasus is a spyware that has been designed by an Israeli company, and it can infiltrate all our mobile phone and extract messages and pretty much everything you have. And we had a list of people that were targeted by this spyware. They were mainly activists, journalists, politicians, lawyers, and to double check that the people that were targeted in that list have been, their mobile phone has been infiltrated. We had to do, some expertise, and we didn't have the skills to do it. So we did a collaboration with Amnesty International, and they have IT experts that developed a process to double check if your mobile phone, have been infiltrated. And so I think it's a good example of how NGOs or people doing advocacy or activists can collaborate with journalists, and I think we will. It's sure that we will not have been able to lead that project without their help and without collaborating with them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Since we're running out of time, if there are any other questions, I think the both of you are around for a bit, so please feel free to ask. Maybe for a final statement from India, do you want to add anything before we close the session? I think we have maybe about a minute left.
एक्टिविज्म और जर्नलिस्ट जो है ना, तो हैं तो दोनों अलग अलग, लेकिन काम कहीं
and journalists are two different professions. There are two different kinds of people. Now, if we talk about journalists, we raise our voices through our pens. And activists too raise their voice. They take up the issues that affect people. But when the two get together, let's say the activist and the journalist, then their power actually increases. And there is, that opens up opportunities for actually solving those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there was little time for such a big topic, but also in India we will show Writing with Fire, and I can just recommend this documentary. It will tell a bit of the story of journalism in India, especially by female journalists. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining me on the panel today, for your insights. I know you will be around. So have a great afternoon and hope to see you for the film screening tonight as well. Thank you.
Hi, welcome back for our last session of the day. So the last two sessions were powerful, huh? First, the wonderful intro by the new humanitarian, then the pitch by Wenders, and then this very, very strong panel on storytelling and activism. So now we come to our last topic of the day, which is who finances the news? Power balance, power imbalance. It was quite interesting. So the combination of people you will see on the stage, it's completely my fault. I was curating it. I am really fond of all of 5 of them. But in those days, you normally don't do pure male panels. But in that case, it just made sense to invite exactly the speakers we selected. And as we also have pure female panels, I think that shows maybe where the expertise lies. We will see. I will leave that up to the discussion following. And please welcome with me Jan Sebastian Friedrich Rost, who is your host of tonight. You know him from the opening ceremony. He founded the festival and he is the CEO of Action Against Hunger. Thanks to him, I'm standing here and doing all the moderations. So thank you, Jan. And I leave the stage to you and your wonderful guests.
So please join me on stage, the three panelists. Unfortunately, we cannot say ladies first because we're all men panel, very gender balanced.
Welcome.
So please take your seats. So I think some people are still outside, but we'll start anyway, as we have an online audience as well. So we have a total of including me, five panelists and myself. I would introduce you one by one and start with a question to make it more interesting and not start with a long introductory round that no one can remember your names anymore once you start speaking. I would like to start with you, Patrice. Patrice Schneider is the Chief Strategy Officer of the Media Development Investment Fund. So the MDIF, I think you call yourself, is basically a non-profit investment fund for independent media in countries where access to free and independent media is lacking or under threat. And the fund has existed since 1995 and has provided more than $250 million, which is quite substantial, I would say, to 131 independent media businesses in 44 countries. So my first question to you would be, has that amount of $250 million been well invested? What can you show for that? How do you measure impact of what you have been doing the last 25 years?
Yes, I can. I will try. First of all, I agree with Anna in terms of the gender imbalance on this panel. I typically refuse to be on such panel, but I can quote. I can say two things. First of all, there is multiple of my colleagues in my team, in our team of mine, that could actually spin in this place, and I wish they were here for that. They could actually replace me easily. And the second thing is my name is now spelled out in a feminine way, so I'm very proud of that. So I think there's a form of balance. To your question, Jan, was it worth it, and has there been impact? So the way of slanting who we are based on that question is the following. It started from a very simple thing, is that in the field of private independent news, there are countries where we work, which is typically a history of media oppression, where what is really needed is capital. You will find in a lot of the countries since the fall of the Berlin Wall a very rich culture of writing. In Latin America, there is a very rich culture, and journalism training is very important, but there is another need. The need to access to two things. One is mission-aligned capital that does not come with strings of saying you must change your editorial line. And the second thing, less and less as the digital disruption comes, is capacity building. Once you've given me some funding in the form of either a debt loan at a low interest or equity, how can you make me become stronger? And a parenthesis, our theory of change is extremely simple and not very original, is that financial independence gives you editorial independence. So basically our job is to make women and men in the hardest conditions in terms of reporting independent information stronger. That is our mission. And that's my segue to your answer to your question, which is how do we measure impact? We measure our impact two ways. First of all, if I say that our theory of change is to make you stronger, how does that happen? And we have very special metrics, which we've been calculating for 15 years. Things that the media development world or human rights world might find strange, but it's really sales, the reach, and viability financially. Because this is only what I'm doing. But the most important work is what you do, which is what is your role? And the second level of our impact is what is your role in society? If I make you stronger, to what avail? And there we've decided to do a very, how would I say, a very straightforward model of calculating, and that's around accountability,
That's the first point. And corruption. There are trillions of things we could be measuring of the impact you're having if I make you stronger financially. But those are the two we focus. Is it the only one too? So accountability, measured in a very specific way, and corruption.
And are there, just one more question, are there limits to where, let's say, these investments into journalism can have an impact? Because you know, there's some countries where governments perhaps are so restrictive that it's basically a drop on a hot stone. So what is the conditions you need?
So the way we look at the world is a sort of a Gaussian bell. So on one side are countries where pretty much there's no need for our intervention. There is some form of difficulty for independent media to strive. Hungary until 2006. Hungary is back on the other side now. And there's the extreme, which you're right, there's nothing to be done. I don't think Iraq and Afghanistan right now are places where our model works. Well, that's why the works of other organizations that come in with a different intervention model are so important. MDIF is not the solution. We believe that in the middle of this Gaussian curves, there are countries where it's hard, like Zimbabwe, like Bolivia, like Guatemala. Myanmar is a bit early, where we can have an intervention. And I think the last point on that is that if you find a woman or a man who is capable, who wants to take that route of making themselves stronger to have a social change in their country, the more harder the environment, the more messages sent to the rest of its community of saying, concretely in Guatemala, under Rios Montt, it was very difficult to become independent and financially independent. But if you do it, it sends a signal that it is possible to do that.
Thank you. So on my left is first of all, Lukas Harlan, who's the program director of Media and Society at the Schöpflin Foundation, a German foundation. What is stated on in the mission statement of your foundation is that you see journalism, obviously, in something such as a media crisis. I read there. It's basically, of course, we all know journalism is going through a phase of transition because of digitization, because of new outlets. But it's also a media crisis, I think you call it, because good journalism is getting more and more difficult to fund, also more and more difficult to distinguish what is good journalism, what not, because outlets have become so varied. What I would like to understand, because I think you speak about the term non-profit journalism. What differentiates non-profit journalism, as you see it, from state-funded or private journalist networks?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The program I'm directing was called Gemeinnütziger Journalismus for about 3 years, so like non-profit journalism. Yeah. Now we changed it into Media and Society because we want to widen the view, and we found out that it is not only about supporting organizations who have a charity legal status, but who are working on the public interest journalism, providing information to society. And I would rather focus on that than only on the non-profit journalism on the one hand side. On the other hand side, there is a necessity about non-profit journalism in Germany because it also means some kind of independency which cannot be always exist if you are linked to the market and has to follow the economy of attention. On the one hand side, and there has to be kind of products into the market of information, if you want to call it like this, beside the public media. And so there are this kind of pillars into the media field, and we are focusing on this non-profit journalism because we are a charity foundation, so we only can support, of course, organizations with this legal status. But on the other hand side, we are trying to think about the whole media field. And we experience that there's more and more collaboration between the non-profit outlets and the public media outlets and the market-based outlets.
Yeah. And you've started or launched something that you call the House of Non-Profit Journalism in Berlin. I think that's an interesting concept. Could you explain a bit what's behind that and what kind of offer that is to journalists?
I would like to make a very quick introduction about where we want to work on as a foundation, and there are several pillars we think we can support media and independency of media. One is the independency, and supporting organizations who could not survive into the normal market. On the one hand side, for example, we have a newsroom in Berlin which is called Amal, which is providing daily news to Arabic and Persian-speaking people. But I come to your question. The other thing is supporting innovation. And not only to the nonprofits, to the field at all, and providing infrastructure. And this is what you were mentioning, the House for Journalism. There is a title already, but we did not start the communication officially, so I cannot tell you about this today, but it will be closed by at the Hermannstraße in Neukölln. It's under construction already. It will be open autumn in 23, and it's supposed to be a place which is not only providing infrastructure to media outlets and newsrooms, but also to organizations and NGOs and single actors who are working on the field of access to information, freedom speech, and then rights and frameworks for journalism, how to work, and public debate and net politics. So there will be a place where, in a perfect world, all these organizations can collaborate within this space. On the one hand side, and they can also use the infrastructure. There will be a co-working space. There will be studios, cutting studios, video studios, all these kind of things. A lot of events, hopefully, and then some newsrooms, of course. And on the other hand side, this house should be a place where concepts are developed for a democratic debate, a public debate. And also, include the kids, the Neukölln people, of course, around, but also society as it all.
Thank you. Last but not least on stage, and then we have two more guests online, two more participants, is Christian Goyny, who's the medienpolitische Sprecher of der CDU. So welcome and thank you for joining us. My first question would be, because we also have an international audience, and I think the German state-funded media system is something that is not so uncommon in Europe, perhaps, but less common, I would say, at a global level. What is the main advantages? What are your goals? What are you pursuing with your media politics?
Well, this German system we have now was a result of the Nazi dictator, and Berlin was always a city which had a very wide a lot of, let's say it otherwise, there's a lot of companies producing newspapers in the old days. We had about 80 daily newspapers in the days before the Second World War. And and it was not unusual at that time that they were politically focused on royals, conservatives, social democrats, and so on. So the people knew, if I buy this newspaper, it's more on this political side or on that side. This all was destroyed, of course, during the Dritte Reich. And after, one of the experiences was that we have, of course, a lot of newspapers still existed. Then radio and TV reduced the number. And okay, now they're all fighting about the digital world, who was first, who was in, and who was financed in which way, and how can you find them there. And but in the meantime, this public broadcasting system we invented in Germany became very big, and they were in the TV and radio for many decades had a kind of monopole situation. So they were the only big national TV stations. They were the biggest radio stations. And in the mid-80s, when private radio broadcasting came around the corner, then the situation started to change, and now we also have some big private players. And we thought always that, and also my party is supporting it, that this is something that is not state-controlled, not state-financed. It's financed by a special fee that everyone, let's say, has to pay. It's collected by a different organization. It's not the tax authorities who collect the money, and they're representatives of the society who are controlling the program and who are electing the Intendanten of the broadcasting stations. And so we think this is something that gives this media construct a special authority, a special independency. And this is for us very important because we want to have the situation that the people can trust what they see in the news, what they hear in the radio. And of course, there is, in these days of right-wing political parties and fake news, they are also fighting against this system because they can only live with their crazy political world if they tell the people that their point of view is right and not the one that is published by the serious media. And let's say the biggest problem we have that this whole system became quite expensive. And one really big problem in this whole complex is the financing the pensions of the former employees of the system. And so the debate is always, so do we have to pay more for the system or less? So we had about 10 years no increasing of the fee, but now everyone says, oh, it's every year it's becoming more and more expensive, which is a lie. And so this is a big debate we are having in Germany at the moment. And beside the technology changes that are necessary also in this world, and the digitalization of the program, the question is also how we can have the qualified journalists. And we see that it's more easier for many media companies in Germany just to hire someone who wants to do something with media, send him out with a mobile or something like this, give him the job to take some interviews and write something down. And if we want to have serious media, we need qualified journalists. And this is something we debated just a few weeks before in our parliament. And overall, political parties, most of the serious ones, we agreed that this is a challenge we have to focus in the next years.
Thank you. I'll come back to you with more questions later. I'd like to welcome also our two panelists, I said one after the other because we have only one slot at the same time. First of all, we have Sunil. Can you hear us in India?
Yeah, hello.
Bring her.
I'm here.
Okay, so good, great. Sunil Rashekar is the CEO of the Independent and Public-Spirited Media Foundation in Bengaluru, India. So welcome, thank you for joining us from India today. I think it must be quite late, no? What is the...
It's about 8 o'clock, 8:30.
Okay, not so bad, not so bad. So thank you very much, and I think it's very important for us also on stage because all of us, we are here basically working from Germany to also hear a little bit. You're very close to what you're doing in India itself. India has gone through a phase of, let's say, political transition as well in the last decade. So what is the situation from your point of view of journalism, of independent journalism in India today?
I think this foundation that I represent today has been responsible in a way for creating a whole ecosystem of independent journalism. We have supported over the years almost about 40 odd entities, media entities. We don't support individual journalism as much as media organizations. Our model essentially has been a sustainability model because we believe that any funding that we do, the philanthropic funding that IPSMF does, should be with an objective that it is a long-term investment in good journalism across. So our funding to a great extent is not only for journalism as much as for helping organizations build a sustainable model. And that's where we are. We have almost funded about 40 odd entities, as I mentioned, and have put in around 10 million euros so far over the last 4 to 5 years. And as a result of that, if you see some of the media, independent media in India, which the foundation has funded, they're very diverse in nature. They've been in the space of political analysis, opinion, those media that cover have a footprint which is national, organizations like The Wire, The Print, or the Mojo Story. We have also funded regional media to a great extent in the Northeast, in Kashmir, as also we look at funding. Our focus to a great extent is language too, because we believe that in the Indian languages, there is definitely a need for good, balanced journalism, and that has been a challenge. We especially focus on that. We have our funding in Malayalam, in Tamil, Hindi to a great extent, and we are looking at other languages too. Community journalism is one area where we have also funded organizations like Khabar Lehria, or CG Netswara, another organization. So these are some of the setups that are there, as also organizations in environment, like Down to Earth. In the gender space, we have one organization that we support on the legal side. There are a couple of them. We have almost kind of were responsible for the formation or creation of an organization called Live Law there, which is today Asia's largest legal site, which reports legal news across, especially the cases that are decided in the Supreme Court. Also organizations in the human rights space, like Article 14. So the whole idea is that we try and be as diverse in our spread. And that has definitely led to a fairly robust media that has been created, independent media ecosystem that we have been responsible for creating.
Thank you, Sunil. And I think I'll also get back to you later. First of all, I mean, I will try also not only to ask questions myself, so also, of course, all the panelists are invited to this is a discussion, and also the audience online as well as here can at a later stage, once we have introduced our final guest, of course, pose their questions. I'd like to welcome our final panelist, who is Miguel Castro. Yes, we can see you now. I hope you can see us. Miguel is the strategy lead of the global media partnerships at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So thank you for joining us. In Germany, for example, there's a well-known partnership between the Gates Foundation and Spiegel, which is a renowned German weekly magazine, and it's been criticized, also seen positively. So how do you? And I've read some articles in preparation for the discussion today in terms of, saying that being funded by the Gates Foundation perhaps is not a label of independence, because Gates is also investing, obviously, the foundation heavily into multiple industries. How do you make sure that the Gates Foundation remains independent from other interests that the founder or the company that made the foundation possible may have?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. So that is a really, really important question for us. So clearly, the relationships between funders and media organizations have to abide by a number of principles. And we have very well-defined principles. We have funded and supported and adhered to principles by other organizations like the American Press Institute. And we discussed this with our prospective grantees and media organizations at length. Sometimes those discussions between prospective grantees and organizations that we work with, they either come to us or we go to them, they take sometimes up to a year, because we want to get to know them well, and we want them to get to know us and the legitimacy of what we do and the reasons why we're funded media very, very well, so that there is an absolute comfort level of the relationship. But even more important is that there is a common understanding of what is the objective of the journalism that they will produce. There is the Gates Foundation has strategies and interests that have to do with global health and global development and gender equality, and Spiegel has interests and a mission to support and service their audiences with one type of journalism. So what is that Venn diagram? What is that they want to do, and that we want journalism to provide audiences that match and that allows us to work together? Those were conversations that took a while, and it wasn't very difficult. Unfortunately, there is a market failure across the entire world, not just in Germany, but quite marked in Germany of reporting on issues that had to do with global health, and global health as the health of populations in a global context, with an emphasis on achieving equity, and global development as in the understanding of the difference of the levels of economic and human development at a global scale and in different societies. So Spiegel's ethos, which they try to reflect on this section that we support in Spiegel Online called Global Societies, I wouldn't dare to pronounce it in German, is how do they inform audiences, their audiences in Germany, about something that the market and journalism fails to report. Just as an example, news about gender equality in 2020, as reported by the Missing Perspectives of News, a report that analyzed more than 60 million stories across the world, came to the conclusion that less than 1% of all of those stories had any gender equality angle at all. So the market fails to report in what we consider socially relevant issues. So we look for, and media organizations look for us that want to address those issues. So if the relationship works, if we adhere to principles of editorial and creative independence, absolutely. Integrity, and integrity as in the trust and reputation that Spiegel audiences understand that Spiegel has is their biggest commodity. The commodity that the Spiegel trades on is reputation. They can't put that to risk by no means. So we work with media organizations who have high levels of trust within their audiences, and with organizations that respect the integrity of their reporting, and obviously transparency of the relationship, transparency of the transaction, and the why and the how. And if we adhere to those principles, relationships blossom. So we have currently around between 30 and 35 media grants across a number of countries globally, and some of them going on for 8 years now. And longer, because we do commit to the long term when we support and incentivize these media organizations to address that market failure that I was talking about. We don't do grants that are less than 3 years. So we commit, we are tackling really challenging questions. So we commit to support these media organizations to inform and educate audiences on these issues in a way that is meaningful, that addresses the bottom concern, which is that unfortunately some of the news that happen far from your home and abroad are not so enticing and entertaining, so they require to be incentivized.
Thank you, Miguel. I would find it interesting, Mr. Goini, to hear how you view the investment of such a large private entity into German media, knowing that we have a public financing model. Do you see, is this something that you welcome, or would you see as a positive development, or do you see it negatively from a, let's say, state perspective, so to speak?
No, I think it's a very good thing that we have different kinds of financing models. So we have the one that is, let's say, a kind of basic financing for information. That's what our public broadcasting stations are doing. But if you want to have a variety of platforms of media to inform, maybe also from different perspectives or different focus or different issues, then I think it's very good that you have these corporations. So I mean, it's everyone knows who wants to know that this is this corporation. No one can criticize that the quality of this media is not on a high level. And so I think it's a very good idea to have these different kinds of financing of media also, because we like to have also private media, private investment, and not and in a big variety. So the more offers you have, the more media companies you have, the better it is for the information of the people.
Just a question, sorry for being uninformed, but in Germany it seems to me that public funding for media is going very much towards broadcasting, less to print, let's say, Zeitung. Is there a rationale behind that?
Well, maybe it's because of the change. I mean, you don't sell the papers anymore in the printed way on the streets, so you have digital platforms from all the former newspapers. So this is, let's say, in a way, a little strange debate, yeah, because in the old days, the ones were selling the newspapers on the streets, the others you could hear in the radio, and the third one, they were in the classic TV. And now everyone is in the World Wide Web, in the digital way, and says, I'm the first here. And so they're transforming all their media platforms in this digital way. And of course, they have to look for new ways to finance. The one is doing better, the other not. But this is also something that the private say to the public, you are financed, you don't have to be there. And they say, no, but it's also a platform we have to be, because that's the way the things are going. And so this is a little stressy discussion sometimes between these different kind of media platforms. But I think it will be necessary that they all have the option to be there, and that they're transforming their platforms in this way. And then you have to discuss also about media regulation, who can be found in which way. Doesn't help that you're in the internet if no one can find you there. So this is also a discussion that is in media politics in Germany becoming more and more important.
If I may add something to that, because the public financing or the public media is especially broadcasting and radio and not press. Press is a different market which is not paid by the fee
yes.
of all of us. And it's intentionally made like this because there's another independent. Now the press media is going more and more into the digital room, which is going to the law of the media of broadcasting and radios currently. So there has to be a change and a transformation about regularities.
Yeah. Just a bit of a provocative question, because I mean, I'm personally, obviously, and I think most Germans are very pro state-funded public television, public broadcasting, because this gives an impartiality, as you say, where if we accept that impartiality even exists, but at least a different level of discussion. And we may see, for example, in American media where it's very biased between different ends of the political spectrum. But why does Germany need an investment of 2.5 or funding of 2.5 million euros by the Gates Foundation when we have state funding? Why does a foundation such as the Gates Foundation, which is also a question to you, Miguel, but also first I'd like to start with Mr. Goni. Why do you think that there's investment coming to Germany from such foundation where we see there's a lot of public funding available? Why is it even necessary for someone to come in to say, here's some money to talk about global societal issues? Why is there a lack of that? And does it have to do with the fact that even you as state-funded entities, or you know, basically making decisions, you are also still prone to the economic model because you have to show Tatort. You cannot only show documentaries about political issues because you still basically, you have to make not profit, but you still have to reach your audience. You measured by that. Is that the reason? Or what is wrong with the model? Because ideally, I think we have so much funding within the German market, we wouldn't need private investment because the model is so strong.
Well, the idea, I think, was never that when we have the public broadcast, then we don't need any other private media. It was just a basic offer for information. And of course, we wanted to have private offers of newspapers, radio broadcasting, TV stations. And if you have, for example, the Spiegel magazine, I mean, it's very serious, it's very important, it's very well known, and I think the Gates Foundation has its reasons to collaborate with such a news magazine, because they're important for investigative journalism. They're important for talking about politics behind the scene and everything like this. And so you also have others in Germany who are private finance, maybe not with this international collaboration. But I think if you want to have a mix of different aspects of media, different, let's say, political issues, then that makes totally sense. I think this is something that maybe we can talk about it, but in the countries we have more media, more newspapers, more platforms where you can get your information. It's in the end better for democracy.
Yeah. That brings me to the next question, which actually I'd like to open the panel. And again, just as a reminder, if there's any questions for the audience, please anytime feel welcome to come ahead to the microphone and we'll take your question. As a festival, for us, a key goal is basically to reach impact. And I'm going back to Patrick. Is that the right pronunciation? Schneider?
Patrice.
But
that's okay.
So it was correct.
It's the same thing.
Okay. Basically, we are also hoping, let's say, and believing, honestly, into film having a social impact. So that film is not only a media tool with its own purpose, but also really can drive social change. Obviously, that's also part of the mission of your work. Can you share one or two really strong examples from which we may, see, okay, that has worked, where you say there's one or two projects from your previous experience, and I'll ask you the same, Lucas, afterwards, where you say these are really examples that you'd like to say, this has worked incredibly well, and our investment, our media project there has really driven societal change?
Well, I think that there's a trillion of examples. We finance 239. We also like to think that anything we fund is meant to have. Now, we have to be careful in terms of social change. I think there's impact and there's social change. Sometimes the ability to show both sides of an argument of polarization of a country is not social change, but it brings value in terms of an open society and instructs citizens of what they will decide. But if I may, Jan, one of the things, linking it back to the Human Rights Festival, if I may, just a second, is what do we do? MDIF basically mobilizes capital and resources from the north, we have to be clear, and distributes it in countries where there's, as I said, a history of media oppression, and the subject is really independent information, which we believe has a societal value. Now, linking this syllogism to what you've just said, I believe that human rights documentaries, human rights film, human rights festival, engage films also bring a societal value. And the real question is, to go back to the question of this panel, is that who finances that? So who finances our social impact, and what can we learn from that? And very, very shortly, I was a journalist. I was a war reporter in Afghanistan, so I was happy in the last session to see one of my Canadian colleagues in Afghanistan. And I loved crossing borders. When I was a war reporter, it was an exhilarating moment of crossing borders. And bringing this back to what I do now, what I really like is crossing other borders. I crossed the Afghan borders, but I also crossed the door of a wealth management Swiss company bank in Switzerland, bringing the subject of societal impact of press freedom. That was a border for me. And symbolically, but it was just as interesting as the crossing. And in that sense, one of the things we've learned in mobilizing that capital, and certainly in these days, is that we may have to reach out. We may have to reach out to the other. Listen, the funding of the civic media, this societal value, is broken. It's not broken everywhere. In the Netherlands, some companies are making a lot of money. In Germany, the same thing. But in general, the civic media, the ability to provide information to your citizens privately, not as another system than the public funding, is broken because of digital disruption, consumption, and so forth. How do we fix that? And I believe that we're going to have to cross borders. One last point on that. I was fascinated by what Wim Wenders was saying in his idea, not just because it's Wim Wenders, but the idea that to bring the subject of peace to people who, we're all convinced here about peace. If I understand what he's trying to do, he's trying to reach out to people who are not convinced. And I think in this world of polarization, so that's on the content side. So what I am trying to say is what MDIF has humbly tried over 25 years is on the funding side to reach out to the non-convinced people. And this is where I go back to the subject of crossing that border at the wealth management brand company. I believe he's onto something, Mr. Wenders, that there are people even in that world where if you cross that border, not everyone, most people will be profit-oriented and so forth, but you may be able to have a conversation because they are all citizens. So crossing borders for me is one lesson I've learned. And one last point is that news media has always had the same mixture. But one thing I've learned from documentary producing, and I'm not an expert, I'm really a journalist asking questions, is there's an immense knowledge about mixing different types of money coming from the States, coming from on this different part. News media does not have that luxury. Documentary has that knowledge. And I wonder whether in this logic of crossing borders and reaching out to other forms of financing to finance the societal impact of that, whether there's not a repository of knowledge inside this way. I hope this was a good link back to, yeah.
Thanks a lot. Lucas, as I mentioned, I'll ask you the same question. Maybe you can be, even though this was a very broad answer and it framed again the whole discussion, so thank you for that. What would be your answer? Do you have perhaps a concrete project that you can think of?
Yes, I would follow on what Patrice was just saying and about what Wim Wenders was saying. Who do we reach out to? And there's one very good example, the newsroom Correctiv, the independent newsroom located in Berlin and in Essen, in western part of Germany. They are very, very much innovative. And there are hundreds of projects I could talk about there, but there's one especially which is called the Crowd Newsroom, which is like turning the kind of investigation the other way around, including the audience about finding out what is the truth. About several topics. The last one was like about the ownership of houses in cities, which is called Wem gehört die Stadt? Who belongs, who's owning the city? And we are funding them for 6 years now, and this is a fantastic example of a newsroom which only can do this kind of innovative work through funding, and not only by being paid from the market somehow. There might be much more examples, and there's one thing I would like to outline, because the title of this session is Imbalance of Power, Who Finances the News? And I think there is an imbalance of power, especially I think if you look internationally, what also Patrice was just mentioning, about media concentration and the rules of the market. So actually by providing money to the market from an independent perspective, or foundations and stuff like this, would maybe give a little bit more chance to put balance into the power on the one hand side. And I would like to say, of course we can support newsrooms for a long time, but as I said, we try to support innovation. There are more and more projects which include the audience and which are paid by audience. And I would love also, and I think it is very important to support the transformation or the exchange of knowledge about that experience all over the world. To newsrooms who can show what is the truth, who can represent minorities, who can work on this crisis of representation, so-called, and who can learn how to develop own income models, for example, paid by the audience, by including also the audience to make the stories.
Thank you. Thank you also for that interesting answer. Sunil, I would like to, well, sorry, first of all, we have an audience question, sorry.
If I can jump in. Hi, my name is Jana. I'm also working as a journalist, and I would love to grab the chance to ask Miguel a question, because you touched on this topic In the beginning, Jan, that you asked, is it okay, what are maybe the difficulties if someone like the Gates Foundation is funding the news? And I had a lot of discussions with my friends, with journalists, but also people who are not journalists about, is that right, is that wrong? And since I have the chance now to ask someone from the Gates Foundation, I would love to hear what would you answer? And that was a question I got a lot. If someone else, for instance, BMW, even if that's a brand, but let's say the BMW Foundation wants to do the same thing, and they are not like necessarily the good guys. So what is like, why is it okay, and in what way is it okay, and would you say others could do the same? And yeah, maybe that's my question, so yeah.
So Miguel, I think that's for you.
Yeah, I got it. I heard it okay. So there is I would imagine there is a very clear distinction between a charitable foundation and a private corporation whose aims are commercial. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a 501c3 organization with charitable goals that are stated around 30-something strategies on global health and global development, equity around gender, and other areas, financial inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. So the organizations like the Gates Foundation, registered as a 501c3, are highly regulated in the US, much more than in many other countries. The charitable objectives of the foundation, because of the way we are funded through an endowment, are like a religion for us. So we do have a set of goals that are clearly stated around the achieving equity on global health and the development of, especially Sustainable Development Goals 1 to 6. And we work with media organizations towards that. And those goals have to do with access to education, with access to clean water, with access to education for girls and adolescent girls, to have access to primary health care, eradicating malaria, eradicating polio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those are goals that are clearly differentiated from those of a private corporation. So it is a discussion that we have with media organizations about how much do they care about these specific goals, or generally the Sustainable Development Goals. But the organizations that we ended up work with are the organizations that have the same values and the same ethos. I don't mean to say that other organizations that we work with don't. They absolutely do, many of them. But the organizations that we fund is because they share interest on reducing the prevalence of HIV among populations in the developing South, because they are interested in what journalism role is in reducing poverty in the poorest part of the world, in lower and middle income countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we are very confident about the legitimacy of our goals. And when I said at the beginning that we work really hard on making sure that media organizations that we work with get to know us and we get to know them, so that there is a proper understanding of what those are. What private corporations' goals are, either through their bottom line or through their corporate responsibility, might be legitimate, and they will do sponsored content relationships with media organizations, which is another legitimate form of media, but that's not what we do. What we do is a joint and common understanding of what society do we want together, and what role journalism plays on that. And we want to be very solutions-oriented and very constructive, because we need to connect into what Patrice was saying before. We need to break that feedback loop between those media organizations that are willing to supply negative content, which audiences are really tired of, and sometimes partisan audiences who have a predilection for negative news. So in the context of the consumption of news, we're interested, and the media partners that we work with, we know very well they're interested in breaking that feedback loop and being constructive and providing the service that journalism should provide, which is a more equitable society globally and locally. I hope that answers the question.
Does it answer your question? Okay.
I didn't hear the answer. Did I, or didn't I?
Yes, I think you said you have. So we have 5 minutes to go. One question also, which was connected to what we had the previous discussion with Wim Wenders about a project on peace. Again, that goes to Sengoni in terms of the state funding. Why is it that we don't see peace on public broadcast or on any TV, but we see war? And the news is mostly about war. It's not about good news. Why is that only because it's a bit of a naive question, obviously, but how can we change that, or do we want to change that, or why is it so?
Well, I really would love to change that, especially as a politicians. You don't like to hear always the things that are broadcasted about you. You would like to hear the good things. But this is really, we're discussing it also in the media politics in Berlin about how can we focus also about positive examples, good things on the values of things. Let's say also about, now we had the last years all these discussions with neo-Nazi organizations and AfD and others that are always focusing about bad things, about the negative things. And we also want, for example, to show about good examples of integration of migrants, for example, so that we see the positive things, that not everything that has to do with change is something negative. And maybe it's a little one reason out of maybe many that people are kind of afraid of things that are changing and things that are happening. The bad things are more scary. So maybe that's why also the Tatort is so famous, because when someone is killed, it's more interesting than maybe when someone has a good life and you don't see it like this, or it's a soap opera style or so. And maybe that's also to do something with political education. And we're doing it maybe not enough in Germany to discuss about how important it is to have democracy, freedom, and fighting for it, and also do something by yourself to keep it. So it's always the people go out when they're angry about it. They're very rare you see them going out for the good things that are already there and to fight for them. It's always this conflict of good versus evil. And maybe this is something that is also, unfortunately, to my opinion, and the focus of the public broadcasting.
Okay, thank you. I have to admit we have a little bit of a miscommunication because we have an additional panelist who just joined us now for technical reasons from India. Am I right? Can we? No, but I think we lost her. We have one more person from India. Okay, all right. So I was already surprised because we see one more panelist here. It would have been a woman, though. We should have asked her to join us. It's a pity. So yeah, I think then I think we just need to find some closing words because we're already moving on then to the next session. So in terms of young filmmakers, young journalists, and Patricia, I would ask you that question to close the session. You know, what do you think is that we as organizations who have some funding ability can do towards supporting young people to choose a path towards journalism, both in the global south and global north? What are you doing, and how can we foster the interest in basically let's say a journalist career, which obviously often doesn't exist anymore? So, and how can we regain consciousness to that industry, or is it a history of the past?
So, as closing word, it needs to be short. Two ideas. The first one is the big elephant in the room is if you bring someone like our organization into it, you have to say that journalism is in a really, it's in a sea change world. We are going to change. And the short message is to attract young people is that it's a question. Do we want to save journalism, or do we want to save the function of journalism that has been playing in society? Because some young people are not going to journalism school, but they're using the media to have a positive. And I can give you an example, is in Brazil, you have a young bunch of people using an application to show corruption in all of Sao Paulo with a business model, and they've never been to journalism. This is work that a journalism has been doing for 200 years. So that's the first question, to attract them. The second thing is my obsession with border crossings. I think that, in line with the question of BMW earlier, I think Arthur Koestler used to say, to refuse to sit with the devil is not a sign of purity, it's a sign of lack of confidence. You have to reach out, you have to cross borders and talk to other people, including corporations, including banks. Philanthropy is a natural ally because of their interest in civil society, but talk to the other people and try to find a way. I believe, if you're a young people today, you say, I want impact in my society and changes using communication, whether we're talking media, and play the role that journalism has played since Camille Desmoulins and the French Revolution and pamphlet. If you want to play that, it's a fascinating offer. And on top of that, you'll be meeting other people than the usual suspect of funding in our world. I think that would be my pitch.
All right. I think very nice closing words, because we have to leave the stage for the next panel.
Apologies to my colleagues.
No, that's fine. Are there any final words that you'd like to add?
I would only add one thing, sorry.
No, please.
I would like to thank Anna Ramskogler-Witt, because she created an incredible, interesting day. Really, really fantastic, although the festival anyway is a fantastic event. But today it was so interesting to follow, so diverse. Thank you very much, I want to say.
Yeah, totally agree.
So we are at the end of this very first day with our Indian partners. So I would leave the stage for a second before I do my final announcements. And we get an end speech and an end inspiration, and I'm very thankful for that. So the stage is all yours.
हेलो सबको, मेरा नाम कविता बुंदेलखंडी है और मैं चम्बल मीडिया की प्रमुख बुंदेलखंडी and I'm head of 20 साल से काम कर रही हूँ.
For 20 years I have been working in media. I have joined all of you on Human Rights Forum, and whoever has come to this forum, I felt very good. Not only that, I felt very happy and felt pride that I was able to participate in such a huge international event, and the different voices from the rural area in India, the reporting that we do, and we were able to talk about them today, and whatever conversation we had, and I want to add only that what is being done for the girls and being trained as reporters, Chambal Media, which is our organization, we set it up in 2015, and our team, rural and backward and tribal women, the women on the ground, for whom the society doesn't think at all, and they think these are rural women. How can they run such a big company? And they think only men can run companies. Who is more educated is from the city and is richer. So we are a model in front of you, and you've given us a chance to present our voice. And that more women in India and get a similar chance, and so I am feeling proud, as I already said, and our medium is Khabar, and such stories are being out. from the rural area, which the mainstream media doesn't consider to be news. Let's say violence against women. We are presenting those voices and these independent reporters. And the main media is trying to shut off their voices, and we have had, and they call reporters activists, and they keep saying, why are they performing these roles? We are facing so many challenges and crossing them. I thought that it's not only a brand, Chambal Media, we also have started a Chambal Academy, and we want that feminist thinking is that we should train women, young women as reporters, because it's considered to be a man's world. That we are working against that kind of negative thinking against women, and we have appeared with such a brand that shows that women can do a lot in our country. They can present the reports from their home, their village, and up to international society. We are ready to spread our voice. First time we have got the chance to have this international exposure. We have set it up over 10 days it took. And we have crossed many technical changes, and I could not give the introduction in the beginning. And with all these changing, I'm sitting in Delhi, and so many things are available in Delhi. But in the villages, we get so many reports that we want to broadcast them across the world. In Delhi, it's okay, but we are getting internet. We have challenges of trolling, also lack of internet. I would only say, of course, I have a lot of things to say and wanted to say many things, but the way we have worked on the ground and brought feminist thinking to the whole world, and my colleagues also wanted to say the same things, and we are feeling proud that Khabar, Lehria and Chambal we have got many awards. And this invitation from the Human Rights Forum has given us further exposure. We are feeling good about it, and I hope that we will be able to further broaden our brand, Chambal Media, within the country and on an international level. We need your support also for that. And those people who have joined with us, and we have heard them, and you have heard us. For all that, we give to say you a big thanks. And I am full of gratitude towards you. Please come to India and meet our team. Go to Khabar Lehria region. You will like it very much. With these words, I end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very kind words. We have to say thank you, really, because, I mean, finding a partner like you guys who would come on board and do this crazy thing with us within 6 weeks, they did it within 6 weeks. It's just incredible, amazing, fantastic, and so much thank you to you and your team, and in particular, Sanya, who was like, fantastic today and the days before. Thank you so much. And I hope we continue the collaboration. So as we have to come to an end, because we are going to start a movie in a second, or in 20 minutes, short announcement of the day. We are going to show now Ghosts of Afghanistan by Julian Schur and Graham Smith. Grammy, you met before on the stage. He's also going to be there for a discussion afterwards. It's a fantastic film, and what I think was amazing is when, unfortunately, the things changed in Afghanistan, they did a recut of the film. So it's, even if the film already is out for a bit longer, it's a very on-point film showing the current situation also, and I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion afterwards. For everyone who wants to know more about our lovely friends from India and their amazing work, I can only really recommend you to watch Writing with Fire. We are having Schmidt and Rintu here, both of the directors tonight, who are absolutely amazing and wonderful, and it's their first screening with an audience after more than 30 film festivals worldwide. So it's a pretty amazing new experience for them. So I hope I will see you all there for that screening. And for now, I hope we see you back again tomorrow for the Forum Day on Realistic Utopias, which hopefully is uplifting and inspiring. Thank you so much.